When I try to explain it, I have to wonder if I'm being stalked or just going crazy. I have had experiences before that I was convinced were born of hallucination or an overly vivid imagination. But this experience has me now believing in things I used to scoff at. Things became undeniable last October during my drive through northern Connecticut. I was returning home from visiting my brother who had been dealing with some unresolved trauma. Both of us had been. My visit had dragged on longer than I intended, and by the time I was on the road, it was almost midnight. I had a 7-hour drive that would take me meandering through the scenic countryside. I had been traversing past old towns for about an hour when a deep fog rolled in. This wasn't unusual for this time of year, so I didn't initially think much of it. I slowed my car down to a safer speed, about 30 miles an hour. The thickness of the fog was demanding on my eyesight, forcing me to lean forward in my seat as I attempted to peer through the obscured ambience. At last, I began to see more than just the dispersed water, but my heart dropped. Through the canopy of mist, I saw the tree trunks. They were gnarled and twisted in an inexplicable manner, like an AI tried to render a scene of nature but phoned it in halfway through. I shook my head violently, attempting to convince myself that I must be getting tired, but the trees became no less surreal. The foliage around the trees offered no more assurance to my concern, as what should have been green was now purple, blue, and floating above the ground in an eerie rhythm. The changing of the sky arrested my bewilderment and forcefully exchanged it with shock. Below the shimmering black rays of sunlight, which began to part the fog beneath them, a being floated. It was majestic and uncanny. Humanoid in appearance, yet monstrous in its aura. Its proportions were off in a way that tingled the parts of my brain responsible for both disgust and admiration. From its fingers, claws began to grow, and from its waist, a tail began to form. The serpentine movements of this newly materialized appendage felt malevolent, yet also somehow hypnotic. I pulled over as my car engine began to sputter and go silent. My heart was pounding as I got out. I don't know entirely why I did, but part of me was stricken with fear of seeing more of that thing, but that same part of me had more fear of not seeing it fully. The entire forest grew silent. The fog was now almost entirely gone. The only evidence of its evanescent presence being the humidity that clung to my car's window. The floating clumps of vegetation had also vanished, leaving behind a landscape that looked scraped and torn by an unsteady plow. I looked up in the sky where the being should have been. What I saw buckled me to my knees. It was a giant circular shape that sheened with a metallic glowing hue. The formation of this shape was slightly bent, giving it an eye-like appearance. Inside the ring of floating steel was an eye of vapor. I then understood what happened to the mist, vegetation, and the sound. A vacuum was gently pulling the noise and plants lacking sturdy roots toward it and beckoning my soul to behold it. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" under my breath, but the words fluttered noiselessly from my lips as they were fished through the air by this floating structure. I felt an urging step toward it, but a forceful,
"No, you are not ready,"
echoed in my skull. I buckled to my knees, cradling my head in shock. Immediately after, the noise started. This wasn't a return of the noise that I should have been hearing, but a new noise being born from this magnificent machine. A deep, reverberant hum that rippled through the ground. It traversed through my shoes and my spine violently. It was so low that I felt it more than I heard it. The trees reacted to its utterance, their leaves shaken off their branches from the unrelenting vibration. As I slowly reopened my eyes, I saw deer, rabbits, and all manner of critters walk toward this floating structure. Their eyes glowed white and their movements were uncoordinated and jerky. Once they were in range, they began to float and sail toward the center of the eye where the being resided. As these animals floated into this being's orbit, the unearthly monstrosity flayed them with its claws. The fluids of these critters exploding, but not onto the creature, which somehow remained spotless, but into the eye behind it. The eye-like swell of energy would hum and glow, as if in delight of being fed by the violent death of the wildlife. I anchored my hands into the dirt to prevent myself from being sucked in. Part of me wanted to run, but another part of me had to see, had to witness. I can't explain it. Looking back, there is no reasonable reason for me to have lingered as long as I did. It wasn't until I realized I was the last living earthly thing in the vicinity that my presence of self-preservation began to return. There was a bright flash and the being vanished. The eye in the sky began to rotate, slowly accelerating in speed. Suddenly, beams of light brimmed from it, cascading beyond me, until they returned and bent around the structure supernaturally. This symphony of luminescence blinded my vision. When my eyesight returned, I saw the beams shifting in their patterns, creating living shapes, like long-forgotten symbols of antiquity crawling about the air. I stood up and began to stumble backward, only to trip on the berm of the road as my heart began pounding thunderously. I scrambled to get back into my car as I became more coherent to the danger I was in. I started slamming my car as I attempted to start it. Had the vacuum not been pilfering the sound, I think I would have gone deaf from my car horn with how hard I was slamming it. Finally, the car started, but I was not in control. The colors of the light on my dashboard began to warble and form similar shapes to those in the air. I began shaking in fear and frustration as I felt my entire world was glitching. I then heard a whisper that both soothed and terrified me. It wasn't in my ears. It was inside my skull, like someone had spoken directly into my soul. A single horrifying sentence.
Now the chosen shall come aboard.
The slamming of my steering wheel ceased as I was gripped by fear. The hum around me turned into a rhythmic thudding, like a creature was taking enormous footsteps somewhere deep within the earth. Was this produced by the same creature that flayed the animals, or a new one with a similar eerie allegiance? I was unwilling to find out as I began to panic to get my car moving. The eye above me constricted, and all the beams of light receded into a sharp snap. In a brazen flash, the beam returned. It slithered out of the eye in a chaotic yet majestic cadence. It began to lower itself to the ground as if it was dangling from invisible threads. It was tall, far too tall to be of this earth. Its arms were the length of its standing body. Its clawed fingers were gnarled in their shape, but smooth in their glossy complexion. What fascinated me most was the face it lacked. Where this body feature should have been was displayed only as featureless oval that reflected white light like wet clay. I could feel all the organs in my body begin to pulse in rhythm with the thudding as I realized it was beckoning to me. With all my might, I shook off the pull of its allure and slammed my foot down on the gas. To my amazement, my car's engine began to sputter and finally began accelerating. Frantically, I made the most ugly U-turn of my life as I began careening down the road in the opposite direction I'd arrived. My car's radio turned on and began blaring an angry refusal as I created distance between myself and the entity. Only there was no melody of music from the radio. It was a cacophony of sounds too irreverent of earthly origin to describe. They wailed and thralled in my ears so viciously I had to wonder if it was actually coming from my radio or from the growing madness of my own mind.
Your destiny has been ordained. You will serve the will whether you intend to or not.
I heard that same monstrous and eerie voice in my mind again. This time it was more forceful and domineering. I felt a splintering pain grow in my skull and radiate into my vision. I almost veered off the road into the forest as I struggled to drive with my eyesight splintering like a broken computer screen. The trees of the forest began to assist the protests of my escape as they bent inward toward the road as I passed them. Some snapped viciously as they proceeded to ooze out a dark black fluid. A fluid that matched the luxurious sheen of that being. The pedal beneath my foot must have been carving into the floor of my car from how forceful I was pushing into it. However, to my relief, I could see the hellish scene behind me grow smaller in my rearview mirror.
Distance is temporary.
The voice was softer but triumphant when it said this, but nonetheless ominous. When it lacked an aggressive tone, it made for up in psychic torture. I felt the sensation of white ripple through me. It was all I could see, hear, taste, feel, and... I know that makes no sense for the other four senses, but if you had endured it, you wouldn't question this description. For a few seconds, I thought I had died and was ascending to whatever the afterlife has in store. However, after the psychic attack faded enough for my blurry vision to return, I saw a tree a few feet in front of me. I screamed no, as I didn't have time to swerve my car out of the way. My right headlight grazed it and sent the car spinning in an eerily noiseless trajectory. I slammed the brakes, hoping to regain some semblance of command over my driving. With each spin, I would get a few milliseconds of eerie light from the being I fled, and a few more of the utter darkness of the barren roadside. This strobe-like effect was horrendous on my still recovering eyesight. Come on, don't fail me now! I gritted with panic as the car stopped, but the engine was still making sounds it shouldn't. I gave it a few seconds to recover, what little I thought I could spare without the entity catching up, but then I heard another voice in my mind.
You think you could escape? You are in my grasp now.
I knew it was now or never. Slamming the gas, the car began to move, albeit jerky and slower. I don't think my speedometer was working right, but at full throttle we couldn't have been going more than 40 miles an hour. Thankfully, this was just a bit faster than the eye that chased me. Within 20 minutes I seemed to be out of range of its voice, and I exhaled in relief. Now if only my half tank of gas could get me to the next gas station. I could only imagine how much fuel I was inefficiently burning through. The sound around me didn't properly return for another 15 miles. I could no longer see the beam, the eye, or any misshapen trees. But I was being followed. I could feel it. The radio eventually flicked on and started to broadcast the rock station I generally listened to. Despite this return to normal, I was shaken. My nerves were a wreck, and I was desperately trying to process what I had seen, and why. Despite being so shaken by it, I wanted to see it again. I eventually did make it to a gas station. I not only loaded up on a tank full of gas, but I also bought some gas cans and filled them to the brim. I also bought an entire aisle of chocolate to soothe my nerves. On my return home, I was pulled over by a cop for driving too slow.
Hey, so I normally pull people over for driving too slow. Everything okay?
The cop asked as he looked at me through my car and onto the massive and unseemly pile of chocolate on the front passenger seat. I wanted to tell him everything, but I knew he wouldn't believe it. Also, this late at night, with the list of medications I was on, would telling him I encountered some alien or demonic being just get me thrown in jail? I decided to tell him enough truth to get me back on the road. If that thing was actually still following me, I couldn't waste time and he wouldn't be good protection from it anyway. I encountered some critters near the road and, long story short, I veered off the road and hit a tree. I think my car is damaged. I have to pound the pedal to the metal to even go as fast as I was when you pull me over. Do you know of a mechanic open this late? Just trying to get home, I said tiredly. I was taking some serious liberty with the story, but he couldn't seem to pry his eyes off my chocolate.
I see. You sure you aren't having an episode of the munchies? You know what I mean.
The cop said condescendingly. I was irritated, but I could see how the circumstances were reasonable for the cop to suspect it. I don't do weed, but I can take a breath test or whatever. I am serious about needing a mechanic, though. Do you know of one? I think my transmission is damaged. My exhaust is restricted, my spark plugs are misfiring, or more likely a combination of all three, I said urgently. I had no idea if what I said made any automotive sense, but luckily the cop didn't seem too mechanically inclined, and was impressed by my assessment of the damage. This was clearly not something he would have expected from someone driving under the influence.
Unfortunately, I don't. Brent's auto shop opens at 9 a.m. I would recommend him if you are still in the area by then. In the meantime, be careful on the road and avoid any major highways. Going too slow can be just as dangerous as going too fast.
Thanks, officer. I will absolutely be careful for the rest of the night, I promised. The officer nodded with a chuckle and walked back to his car. I checked my phone and noticed I had a mountain of messages from both my brother and my friend group, particularly from a former relationship of mine. I decided to shove my phone back into my pocket. I was too mentally drained to deal with all that. I eventually did make it back to my house and found a mechanic to repair my car's damage. For days afterward, I tried to persuade myself that nothing supernatural had happened, that it was all either from sleep deprivation or being spooked by the dark. Any rationalization sounded better than admitting it could have been something vast, intelligent, and looking for me. I had almost fooled myself into this facade of security, but a week later that faith was shaken. As I was walking my dog, something I do most nights before going to bed, I was wrestling with a sense of melancholy I couldn't quite put into words. My reflection shuddered when I noticed white clouds swirling above my house in a circular pattern. They created a shape eerily similar to the eye. Then it blinked. I was buckled to my knees again as I heard a loud,
"Found you,"
from deep within my soul. I don't think it was an eye in the sky. It was something looking through it. It was that being. It knows where I live. Yet this time, I don't know if I will run. The Groaning Lake. 2 months before the sky blinked. There is no easy way to describe the events at Lake Mithril, mostly because the lake now no longer exists, at least not in the way it once traumatized us, not in the way it once sounded. Yes, this lake uttered a sound. Let's start with the beginning. Last summer, my friend Josh decided to convince our friend group to do an outdoorsy activity to enjoy the pleasant weather. Initially, they wanted to go rock climbing. I don't hate rock climbing, but I felt a strong urge to go to the lake. It was easy to persuade our friend group to change their mind, especially with how keen Luke was to try out a new location he had discovered. I don't know why I felt so strongly to reroute our plans, but in hindsight, I wish I didn't. Lake Mithril wasn't a tourist destination. It wasn't on any maps Josh had. His friend Luke had discovered it through some old hiking post. The kind of post where people upload grainy pictures of creepy events that they claim to have experienced. The post revealing the lake had clear instructions. The poster wanted to share it, but also wanted to ensure it was kept clean and relatively untouched. It took us a long, lonely hike to reach it. The forest around it was heavy and damp from the humidity the lake produced. The earth we trudged through was wet and uneven. It was not muddy, but sponge-like. Every step we took sunk into the ground and gave you an awkward, bouncy feel as you pressed forward. Despite how laborious it was to travel, I was enjoying the scenery of the Massachusetts wilderness. As we reached the lake, I was expecting moonlight to be shimmering on the water. I learned quickly that Lake Mithril does not shimmer. It absorbed the splendorous moonlight around it and trapped it in its mirror-dark sheet of algae. This canopy of algae was so black it looked obsidian. It was also barren of noise or any signs of life. There were no ripples, no insects flying over it, no fish disturbing its depths, not even the faintest gust of wind to produce a sound from this vast body of water. There was only the eerie silence. About 30 yards from the shoreline, we started setting up our camp. Josh, Luke, and Sally, my girlfriend, were all in high spirits. "That was a long hike. I think that post lied to you about this being a casual scenic trip," Sally teased Luke, as we all wearily threw down our camping gear. Sally had immigrated from England back during high school. My guy friends had teased me that I had fallen for her accent. While I definitely appreciated it, what really drew me to her was her fun spirit and her kindness. Our other female friend in this group, Cassandra, had been the largest recipient of this kindness. She was shy and reserved, but Sally always made an effort to make her feel included. Cassandra reminded me of my brother after the death of our parents left him traumatized in the shell of who he used to be. "Yeah, I'm quickly learning to double whatever hiking time those posts estimate," Luke chuckled with a grin. "It was worth it, though. This lake is beautiful," Josh said, as he stared at the lake while unzipping his tent bag. "You guys as thirsty as I am?" I said cheerfully as I opened the cooler I'd been assigned to haul. The cool air that wafted from it was a delight to my exhaustion as I began grabbing drinks and throwing them to my friends. "Hey, do you not know how carbonation works or something?" Luke complained as he caught his airborne soda. "You all right?" I asked, ignoring Luke's complaining and looking at Cassandra. She had been nervously looking at the lake. "There should be animal noises, at least the very chirping of crickets," Cassandra answered. There was worry in her voice, but none of us found it out of place. Her family worried about everything, from the most far-fetched conspiracy to the slightest abnormality in weather. I could see Josh and Luke roll their eyes, but not wanting her to feel belittled, I gave her a calculated answer. We must have spooked them, or maybe the species of cricket that lives up here doesn't chirp. We should be fine. Anyway, what flavor of soda would you like?" Cassandra laughed it off, realizing I was shielding her from the other two. Sally walked up and patted me on the back, her silent thank you for not jumping at the chance to tease her like Josh or Luke would have. The night dragged on mostly well as we visited and snacked around the fire, yet the entire time, Cassandra would still glances at the lake. The first sound came sometime around midnight. It didn't originate from the trees or any animals, but from the water itself. It was a low, long groan that rolled across the surface. It was deep and vibrated our tent poles and shook our bones. It was a sound no waves should be able to produce. It was a sound that forced me to wonder if something was stirring deep below. We all scrambled within our tents to grab our flashlights and makeshift weapons. Josh aimed his flashlight at the lake. Just as the lake had done with the moonlight, the beam of his flashlight was absorbed and denied. There was no reflection and no revelation of what had made the noise. Do lakes make noises like that?" Luke whispered. No one dared answer. We all stared at each other awkwardly until Josh broke the silence. "I think we should get back to the car." He was cut off as something stirred in the lake. Movement in its water clutched firmly onto our focus. All of us stared dumbfounded as a bulge began to rise from the center of the lake. This bulge caused a ripple across everything, disturbing the algae and sending rays of light bursting from them. The light was blinding, but captivating. We all winced in pain as we cradled our eyes. As soon as my eyesight recovered, I pried my fixation back onto the lake. More ripples were being produced, and more light was escaping the darkened aquatic sheet, but the light was diminishing in luminescence with every ripple. I wish I could say we did the smart thing, but we didn't. We stood there transfixed at the lake's ominous performance. Even Josh seemed to have lost his desire to flee in favor of witnessing the show at the lake. The return of silence broke the spell. We all looked at each other worriedly, as if about to ask each other if we should run into the dark forest. Another ripple in the water denied that conversation. This ripple was louder and more surreal than the others. Unlike the other ripples, it did not radiate outward. It radiated inward. It was accompanied by a voice so unique and magnificent I will never forget it.
"Herald of the Knock, lead them to me."
These words it uttered sent shivers down our spines. It didn't feel mortal, but like someone talking in a dream, but so visceral and pain-inducing we knew we had the misfortune of being awake. I shouted for everybody to run, taking the initiative. Josh had started seconds before us. More cascades erupted in the water as something began to rise from its depths. I had no intention of finding out exactly what it was. I wanted to get us the hell out of there. No one argued, and they began sprinting behind me. "Did you guys hear what it said?" I shouted between ragged gasps of air. "Hear what? Like it spoke?" Luke said, confused. "I only heard watery noises," Cassandra answered in a slow and controlled rhythm to accommodate her lack of aerobic endurance. My head began to whirl. Had no one else heard it? What in the hell was the knock, and who was the herald? Lead them? But I forced those questions out of my mind as the thudding behind us became more pressing. As we entered the forest, I grabbed Sally's hand. Her pulse was raging. Our feet began to trample on the spongy dirt, but now it was different. This spongy dirt began to ripple and vibrate in such a manner that it felt alive. The vibrations drilling into us through our shoes, feeling like a foreign heartbeat, pacing to a dark, malicious rhythm. Josh had tripped on this spongy terrain, allowing myself to take the group's lead as he fumbled to recover. Eventually, we reached a fork in the trail. We had two options. Take the left, which we had taken to arrive there, which was shorter, or the more scenic right route. The sound of crunching forestry behind us reinforced the need to decide quickly. "We're going left," I shouted, thinking the choice was obvious. This path had much sparser vegetation, and we should be able to run with less risk of tripping or getting snagged. I suddenly felt a sense of dread after shouting that. This path would lead us past a small pond. Would that water be problematic? Was all the water here infested with whatever evil was chasing us? No, you're making the right choice. Lead them all, I thought. I don't know why I felt so reassured. It was a silly trail of thought to begin with, but also a nonsensical, almost foreign way for me to reason with myself. The growing noise behind us, however, forced all thought from my mind as I kept up a pace for my friends to follow. We were almost beyond this pond when I heard a scream from behind us. "Help!" Josh screamed as tendrils from the pond wrapped around his feet and pulled him into the water. "What?" I said as I turned around, but to my horror, the pond was now a bubbling crimson. The sound of our pursuer grew louder. The tendrils began to loosen and writhe within the pond, as if losing interest in their fresh catch and hungry for another. They also began to glow a malevolent ultraviolet black. This light sent eerie shadows throughout the forest in a disorienting strobe-like effect. "Keep going!" I shouted again, horrified with myself for not doing anything to help Josh, but unwilling to lose another friend. If we could just reach our cars, maybe we could be safe. Maybe we could live to get help, to find out what it was that just killed him. I had issued that command in the nick of time. The tendrils began to lunge at Cassandra. "Cassie, jump!" I roared. In a panic, I saw her launch herself forward. She tumbled and rolled into some thorny forestry. Her skin was now cut and bleeding, but that extra velocity had just pushed her past the maximum reach of the tendril. I dashed over to help her up, and I could see that tendril continue to lunge forward. The ultraviolet light around it began to pulse faster, as if it was furious that Cassandra had evaded her. "We aren't safe yet! Keep moving!" I roared, as I grabbed her by the shoulders and forcefully threw her into another run. "Thank you," she said, holding back tears.
Don't make helping them escape a habit.
I heard that same dark and ethereal voice shout into my skull. I almost lost my coordination as it said this to me. Luckily, Luke noticed as I began to wobble and grabbed me by the shirt. "Whoa, man, are you okay?" he said worriedly. Yeah, just a little dizzy. Let's keep moving." I shouted, pretending to be okay, but I wasn't. I wasn't going to be okay for a long time, if ever. Finally, we reached our vehicles. Our hearts were pounding and the noise behind us became eerily non-existent. Despite the cessation of it, we frantically got inside our cars and sped down the road. We met up in the parking lot of the nearest gas station. Sally and Luke were hysterical. Cassandra and I tried to reason with them that we couldn't go back, not until we found help. I called 911 and was assured that help would be on the way. Shortly after my call with the police, I received a text from Josh.
You led him well.
I almost dropped my phone when I read this. How was this possible? Was Josh still alive, or was something texting for him? What did leading him well mean? Would we have survived if we had gone right? I'm almost certain now that we would have. Guilt etched itself inside me as I wondered why I had been so adamant to go left, so adamant to do this trip at all. I then remembered the thoughts that made me make those choices. Were they even mine? The flash of blue and red disrupted my internal reflection as the police arrived. We gave them our story, and the officer started coordinating with the forest rangers to search for Josh. The search party didn't find him, and they did not find a pond or a lake. The forest, they said, was as dry as a bone. We were questioned for weeks. Josh's parents were furious. The police were certain we were abusing substances, but our tests came back clean. They were contemplating charging us, but Josh's phone started getting triangulated by the police, showing up at random places through the state, but moving too quickly to be caught. No murder charges were brought against us. I showed the police the text I had received from Josh's phone. This now has them believing someone else killed him in the forest and has hidden his remains. They still don't believe us about the lake, deciding for us that we may have witnessed a murder in the dark and the trauma warped our memories. Weeks later, I received another text from Josh.
Next, you will lead Sally. Then you will become my voice. You will herald my return. You will describe my glory to the masses, and finally, I will consume the friend you denied me. Remember where your loyalties lie.
I was shaken when I read this. I don't know what kind of sick joke was being played on me, but I was not amused. Where my loyalties lie? It sure as hell wasn't with this psychopath or whatever monster that killed my friend. I showed this to the police and they urged me to be careful. I have since given that phone to the police and started a new plan with a new number. I have also, it hurts to write this out, I've broken things off with Sally. I didn't tell her why. I made up some bullshit reason to be mad and to end things. I can't stop thinking about how I convinced our group to go to a lake instead of rock climbing and lead us into the forest and down that path. I don't know if I can trust myself. And if whatever the hell this thing is, it wants Sally. I can't risk it. I can't risk my mistakes putting her or Cassandra in danger. I've been having a recurring nightmare that is growing in intensity, and my normal coping mechanisms for it aren't working. I've started to wake up in rooms of my house I didn't fall asleep in. Even scarier is when I do wake, there are makeshift weapons tight to my grip and damage in the walls and furniture. The final straw was when it happened while I was awake. I was doing the dishes, trying not to think about my past, when suddenly I was in the garage, scraping the lawnmower with a jagged plate. My hands felt like they were bleeding, but there was black fluid everywhere. Looking around, I saw that all the fluids I stored in this garage, brake fluid, motor fluid, antifreeze, etc., had been torn and ruptured. It was a miracle I didn't hurt myself. I'm dangerous to be around. If I ever find out what it is that's going on, I will ask her to forgive me. But for now, I think it's better I stay alone. Better I be as reclusive as I can until I find a therapist that will believe me and do more than give me pills that numb the anguish but don't address the root. A trauma that is deeper than my terrible relationship with my father and loss of my mother. The trauma of seeing my friends killed in front of me. The trauma of society insisting I am insane and believing what I saw. And the trauma of knowing I may have been a part of what got them killed. I wish that was the end of this story, as bitter and depressing as it would be, but it isn't. After relocating, getting a new life together, and picking up a new prescription, I received a new text from a number I wish I could forget.
Your number may change, but my plans do not.
The flickering star, 2 years before the sky blinked. My father never believed our planet was alone in the dark. He didn't mean aliens in a strictly sci-fi sense, but in a more ancient and primordial meaning of the word. He asserted there was something ancient, something that slept dormant within reality's core, waking only to bring its designs to an end. These beliefs were just fun curiosities to him at first. but became stern certainties after my mom died. Grief can be an alluring gateway to madness. He worked as an astrophysicist at a small observatory in eastern Rhode Island. Growing up, I used to visit him during his late shifts. His work environment reeked of old degrading electronics and long-neglected dust. The one piece of equipment he did keep in good repair was his state-of-the-art telescope, the Leviathan, aptly named for how it towered over everything. After Mom died, I stopped seeing him at work. He all but gave up on raising us. A nanny was hired to take care of my brother and I. My father became cold and distant. I slowly gave up trying to have a meaningful connection with him, as every conversation I attempted to have was dulled by his apparent distracted attention. He would nod through my stories of my personal life, but I could tell his focus was on his work, on what the Leviathan was showing him. All this changed 2 years ago. Inexplicably, he texted me, asking me to come work with him. I was hesitant and a little resentful, knowing he wanted to see me, but the focal point of this reconnection being at his work felt hollow. I didn't have the heart to turn him down, though. It had been hard enough losing Mom. Maybe I could pull Dad back from his grief and salvage our failed relationship. When I arrived, the laboratory was spotless. My father's eyes were bloodshot, and he was a grimy pale, moving erratically as he greeted me. I was shocked to see no evidence of a single speck of dust throughout the laboratory. It was as if he had been intent to rid even the smallest of distractions from the purity of his work. "Come here, you have to look," he whispered aggressively at me. His emaciated hand clutched my arm and dragged me behind him. He led me up a flight of metal stairs to the Leviathan. "You need to see it," he said flatly, gesturing to the enormous telescope before dashing away from me and fiddling through the room. I could hear him cleaning compulsively as I leaned into the eyepiece. I expected to see celestial, but predictable scenery, perhaps a cool combination of colors from a gas planet. What I saw perplexed me. I was beholding a star, unlike any I had ever seen. It was pulsing in rhythm. A slow pulse, a fast pulse, followed by 3 pulses of such blistering speed, my eyes almost failed to discern them as a singular burst. Each pulse corresponded with a change in color. "Is the telescope broken?" I asked, bewildered, trying to think of how a celestial body could be changing color so rapidly. I craned my neck to the left and right to see if there was any damage to the frame of the device. Nothing was amiss. Everything looked as perfect and well kept as the room it was housed in. "No, the Leviathan is perfect. I keep it perfect. It will always be perfect," my father said, as he rubbed his hand against the metal casing of the instrument. His eyes were fierce and protective. His gaze pierced into me like he wanted to accuse me of heresy for doubting the proficiency of his sacred object. I wanted to protest how this would be impossible, outside of atmospheric scintillation, which I presumed the Leviathan had been modified to account for. But before I could bring that up, my father threw down a thick stack of paper. He then began scattering the papers about, suddenly disinterested in his fascination for cleanliness. My edification of this grand discovery trumping any other sense of reason. I could barely keep up with his cascade of firmly asserted facts as he recited his years of meticulous documentation. "The pulses, they match binary. The star is alive. The star is speaking to me. It is now speaking to you." This was his first statement since his ramblings that I could properly understand. I was doubtful of his claim and hurt. To know he had spent so much time away from the family that needed him, only to be pulled into such a delusion over what could only possibly be explained as a faulty telescope, struck my soul. I bit my tongue, though. Hopefully in time I could get him to see the error of his ways. For the next week I continued to visit him at the laboratory. The pattern of the stars pulsing remained consistent, but grew in intensity. I was surprised that there were not any variations in this sequence, Assuredly, a broken telescope would eventually have more variations in its faulty readings. This question became an afterthought as I began to have the dreams. I was floating listlessly over a vast crimson landscape. The scenery below me had thick, massive crevices filled with black, shadowy depths, separating the red land masses. These now cracked stretches of scarlet sheened and reflected like polished clay. The crevice below me grew in its well of darkness. The red land was thrust in every direction with a clamor of unholy sounds as the darkness conquered it. Something stirred in that expanding darkness. A shape like a serpent made of white, wisping fire. It circled around me in an oval-shaped pattern as if it was racing to see its tail. Its movement was elegant but jarring, like it was sleep slithering but with baleful purpose. I awoke with a taste of burned metal in my mouth and a bloody nose. My father had a similar dream, as did some of his astronomer colleagues. My father was delighted that the star was speaking to me as it had for him. I was worried that there was far more likely some kind of foreign substance being exposed to us. Was it lubricant he used to maintain the Leviathan? Was it the cleaners he used to keep the workspace spotless? I could not explain how his colleagues, working from other laboratories in other states, would have the same dream. I pressed my father on this, trying to discern if they had the same Leviathan. I was suspicious that they had been exposed to the same glitchy sequence of light. Even if they had, could seeing light while awake affect your dreams? My father was disinterested in my inquiry, his sole focus consumed with deciphering what the star was speaking to us. 3 days later, the color in the star's sequence changed. Shortly after, the Leviathan broke. Its sensors had been fried from the luminance of the star it attempted to perceive. A luminance it was sharing to the peering eye of my father, who had leaned into its eyepiece. My father started screaming in a mix of torturous pain and cathartic delight. "It beheld me! It spoke my name!" my father rasped. He then looked at me with eerie disappointment. He began grumbling as he tore down the Leviathan and pulled together random electronic devices from the lab. He kept waving at me to stay close but wouldn't look at me or respond to me. "Dad, what's going on? Are your eyes okay? We should take you to the hospital." He cackled at the thought and continued to work on his project. It looked like a panel with wires and batteries shoddily soldered together to it. There was also a black pouch filled with liquid in the center. I began to turn away when he forcefully grabbed my arm and slammed it onto my face. The liquid popped and covered my eye, which burned at first but also paralyzed me. As I tried to fight through being stunned, he flicked the switch and a series of light was emitted from the device. My vision in each eyeball was spinning, but not in sync with each other. My eyes were not moving, but my eyesight was ripping and tearing. It felt like the worst bout of night paralysis I ever had was given steroids. Eventually, I blacked out. When I awoke, we were near the salvaged corpse of the Leviathan. My father was dancing around me, spinning for joy and screaming that what had failed on him had succeeded on me. That the message he feared died with him had been given to me, as well as the sacred blessing. What had succeeded? What blessing? Enraged, I ripped my cell phone from my pocket and dialed 911. At first, I intended to call the police, but as my father began hyperventilating and foaming at the mouth, I decided that an ambulance was more critical. The paramedics had to wrangle my father into the stretcher. He was half blind but fully defiant. He writhed and pleaded not to be taken out of range, whatever the hell that meant. As they drove off, I began to rub my temples from the stress and realized there was no liquid. Had that been some kind of dream? I could have sworn some fluid burned my eyes, but maybe that was an after effect of the sleep paralysis? I went to the bathroom to check the mirror, and there was nothing odd. My hair was slightly ruffled from laying on the ground, but I otherwise was as clean as a whistle. I now don't know how much of my father's final descent into madness is true memory or something else. The laboratory is now defunct. My father is not getting better. The doctors have informed me that even sedated, he whispers numbers, sequences, and indiscernible codes of information. He will do this for hours on end until his throat begins to bleed. He colors the walls, the craftsmanship of his madness being a monstrous, ram-like being with horns and a reptilian face, a torso akin to the muscularity of a gorilla despite its clawed fingers. However, the tentacles beneath the torso are what disturb me the most. Wrapped inside them seem to be other smaller beings. One is similar to Quetzalcoatl and looks like the serpent form from my dreams. The other is a humanoid being that has no mouth and has sharp angular skin that is segmented, giving it a totemic appearance. He laments that the color of his artwork is off. "It should be colorless. It would be beautiful colorless," he rambles. The thing is, he paints with crimson fluid pried from underneath his skin. On my last visit, his madness had magnified. He clutched my wrist with his bony hand and screamed at me. "It wasn't a star. It was more, far more glorious. Here is the perfect being, the perfect state of existence." His pupils were hardly visible as he said this to me. I was stunned, and in my moment of hesitance, he leaned forward and pressed his skull against mine. "He didn't choose me. He chose you." I didn't stay to hear the rest of his madness. On my way out, though, I heard him screaming about photonitically induced DNA absorption, the perfect vessel, and how the sanguine black always succumb. My father died a few days later. With his death, my dreams have become more intense. They are always the same, but their vividness varies. After experimentation, I have discovered this vividness correlates with how close I sleep to the defunct laboratory. I can't explain this. I can't explain any of this. The only thing I can explain is I am moving the hell out of this state. The revelation, days after the sky blinked. My dog began barking at the cloudy eye. It whimpered and pressed its paws against my leg, trying to get me to move, but I was done running. I had lost my father, my friend, and was on the verge of losing my sanity. I needed answers, and I saw the misty eye form images inside its cloudy ring, images of a circling serpent, a bubbling pond, and small animals being lifted into the air. I knew this would end today one way or another. I let go of my hold on my dog's leash and it bolted away. Slowly I walked to my door and entered my house. As I stepped inside, I could hear a whoosh of noise, and the mist began sailing through the chimney. The unlit fireplace rattled as the mist violently traversed across it. The mist then swirled around me for a few moments before shooting to my left and right. The mist smelled chemical, like a natural gas, but foreign and mysterious. There was a bright flash, and finally silence as two dark figures stood before me. Their bodies were uncanny. Dark, shimmering black with inhuman proportions and a bubbling nature. It was as if they were comprised of suspended liquid, a liquid eager to ripple away. Yet their faces horrified and delighted me. I saw my father's face to the left and Josh's face to the right. These bodies attached to them, seemingly under their control, somehow providing them a second chance at life. "Son, I am so glad you are here. I am so glad you are listening. You have been chosen by deep greatness. Soon His Eminence will take final form in this world and He will reshape it. He will make it beautiful, far more beautiful than we could have ever imagined." My father's voice was off. It was cold and distant, but in a persuasive and alluring manner. My heart was not swayed by these seemingly frivolous details. It was good to hear his voice again. "What happened to you?" I said weakly, as my eyes bounced from looking at him and at Josh. We have been given life. Soon no human will be able to live on this earth, but we will. We have been blessed with beautiful bodies, and soon so will you. You will help us find others that recognize that magnificence to serve him. We will rule this world under his careful watch. Don't you see, son? Don't you see the blessings we are about to enjoy? We will finally rid this world of its most offensive corruption. My father continued, his voice suddenly laced with venom. Whoa, what's this corruption? Who is he? I asked, as I slowly moved across the room. I noticed a small trail of mist drifting around the feet of my two visitors and wafting up through the chimney. Were they still connected by this trail to the eye? Lord Danok, father of all Danoctrin, and we revel Danok. Fire is the accursed substance. That blasphemous element must only exist by the craftsmanship of the master. Humans dared to harness it on their own, and for that they will be punished. My father seethed. I nodded politely, scared as to what any other action would have incurred. Son, there is something urgent. Our Lord is hungry. Preparing for his arrival will take energy, and he needs more to fully transition. We need you to lead again. Perhaps you still know Luke? Don't worry. He will still get a beautiful body. He will be okay, my father said, and his voice was now almost pleading. His eyes were sullen, but determined as they awaited my answer. Yeah, let me text him, I said, as my adrenaline began throbbing. I shifted my pace forward nonchalantly as I opened my phone. Slowly, I began typing random inputs on it. I just needed a few more seconds of distraction. Good, good. You have no idea how great a blessing you are bestowing on him, my father said with a disturbed cadence. Oh, I know exactly what kind of blessing you have in mind, I hissed as I was now in range of the switch. With a violent snap of my hand, the fireplace was flicked on. I could hear a roaring wail from deep inside my skull. Fire flashed from the fireplace and upward, but also inward. Josh and my father were now ablaze, looking at me horrified. Why would you do this? My father asked, as he crawled on the ground in agony, the black body of his steaming and hissing as the flames charred it mercilessly. Because you killed my family long ago, I barked. Images flashed through my mind. Images of my brother and I in grief over losing our parents. Images of no one believing what had happened to myself and my friends and wondering if I was going mad. Images of the horror my friends and I endured near Mithril, and images of Sally. The heartbreak on her face and the shattered trust in her eyes have haunted me for so long. Now I finally have a reason to justify that pain. If I could stop whatever this thing was, if I could keep this world safe for a bit longer for Sally to enjoy it, it would be worth it. The Ignari. They corrupted you, didn't they? My father began to say, before his mouth became inoperable from the burns. There was a loud explosion, and I was thrust back against the bookshelf. The recoil tipped it over and the shelf fell on me. I'm pretty sure my left arm was broken, but luckily that was the worst of it. It felt like I was bleeding, but there was only black liquid on it. It must be the leftover bits of their bodies from the explosion, I thought in revulsion. After several agonizing minutes, I crawled from underneath the wreckage. My front room was a wreck. The chimney was charred black, but there was no mist. I almost puked when I noticed the bodies. They were still emanating smoke. 2 skeletons dry of flesh aside for their heads, which almost looked to still be living. I walked over to the face of my father. His eyes were vacant. I realized then that the last conversation with him was not in the room. It was months, probably years ago. I shuffled around my room until I found my phone. The screen was cracked and his body was bent, but somehow it still worked. With my right hand, I dialed a number I had tried so hard to forget, but knew I never could. What do you want? Sally's voice snapped from beyond the phone. She was furious with me, and I couldn't fault her for it. She had every right to be. But I had to tell her. I had to tell her the truth. The consequences be damned. Sally, we need to talk. I found Josh. As I waited for Sally to come over, I watched my house burn. Part of me should have been mortified, but seeing my entire neighborhood react to it was somehow cathartic. After so long of wondering if I had been going crazy with my small group of friends, now finally everything was out. There was no denying it now. Everything I had experienced was true. I don't know why I was chosen to be a herald. I assume it was due to my father's actions at the lab. I don't know what Danach, Revel Danach, Danoctrin, or the Ignari are, and I don't care. If they are alien factions competing for Earth, the government or military or FBI or whatever else can take care of it. A car drove up, and as I saw Sally jump out of it and run toward me, I finally, after months, felt free. Hey everybody, Kevin here from Nightmares Nightly. So this story jumped, it stayed in the same perspective, but it jumped timelines a little bit here. I hope you all enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I liked reading it. I had a good time with it. I love some good otherworldly, alien, almost almost Lovecraftian entities, it seemed like. I don't know if y'all caught this, but, or you would have had to have heard, the story of, from Mr. Outlaw, the prison guard story, which is actually, I've been planning on recording, I'm a guard stationed at a secret government prison. I planned on recording that. I had the script, all highlighted and stuff, and I was going to send out voice lines. But then I just recently listened to one of, Dark Somnium's, one of his, that 2-hour narration he just put out. And he said in the intro that he was going to redo that story. And I was like, man, I don't know if I'm going to do it, if he's going to redo it. He did it 6 or 7 years ago. But when I heard him say that he's going to redo it, I was like, and he said it'll be out in a couple months. Who knows if that's true or not? Could be a couple months, could be 6 months. These long projects take a while. But once he said that, I was like, man, should I even record it? Let me know if y'all even want to hear that from me. I mean, he's gonna do it. It's gonna be amazing. So I don't know if I'll do it anymore. It's a long story. It's a long story too. I think it's like 3.5 or 4 hours. Might be 4.5. It's been a while since I've listened to it. But this story kind of reminded me of the entity in the end of that with the blinking. In the end of that story, there's an entity that is, once it's been seen by a civilization or a consciousness, it then goes after that consciousness. This kind of gave me vibes from that, at least, slightly. They're entirely different stories, but that theme reminded me of it a little bit. I love alien stories, otherworldly stuff. I hope to do some more alien stuff here around soon. They're just hard to find. They're hard to find good alien pastas. Woundlicker writes that amazing series. I'm a captive, or I'm a human aboard an alien spaceship caught in an alien war, stuff like that. He has an amazing series, but there's not really much out there. If y'all find any, please let me know. This was written by The Keeper. Awesome guy in the narrator space. Awesome narrator, helps people out a lot, helps other people. Always friendly, always eager to lend a hand with anything. If you enjoyed it, please go over to The Keeper. He'll be tagged. He'll be a collaborator. He'll be in the description, stuff like that. This was written by him, submitted by him to me. Let me know too. I'm always looking, guys, for viewer submissions. I have now listen, I don't answer emails. Please don't email me. It's just I guess I always knew there was something off about the small community I grew up in. It's all about context, I suppose. When you're a kid, you just accept what you're told, and the world around you seems normal, if only because you don't know any different. I was struck by tragedy at a young age, losing both my parents to a senseless act of violence. Naturally, this trauma defined my later life. But in the years which followed the loss of my mom and dad, I only grew closer to the community around me. They're the ones who were there for me, after all. My neighbors were my family. They raised me, looked after me, and helped me through my grief. And then there was Calhoun, the high priest and leader of our community. He became a father to me after my own dad died. I hung on Calhoun's every word, respected him, trusted him, loved him. It all seems so foolish now. Of course I was raised in a cult. That's obvious to me in retrospect. But this isn't the half of it. Because once I started down the rabbit hole, my old life was gone forever. Let me tell you about Bunker 1, the place where I was born and raised. We lived our entire existence underground, never seeing the sun or feeling the wind against our skin. Calhoun was the father of our community and the oldest amongst our number. He was the only one who remembered the old times, before our people were forced from the surface and took sanctuary below ground. Calhoun spoke of an apocalyptic war which killed billions and poisoned the earth, leaving the surface uninhabitable for decades to come. Calhoun used this mythology to build his religion. He promised that our piety and loyalty would be rewarded. We, the people of Bunker 1, were God's chosen ones. When the time was right, either we or our descendants would return to the surface and repopulate the earth. This was our destiny, or so Calhoun had us believe. When I finally discovered the truth, I hated Calhoun for the lies he told and for what he did to me. But now I realize he faced a difficult choice. And looking back, I have some sympathy for the old man. I understand his motives, even if I can't justify his actions. I was a grown man by the time my story begins. By most accounts, I had a good life in Bunker 1. The underground facility was well provisioned and stocked. We had modern amenities, power, and enough food and water to last for decades to come. The community was tight-knit, and everyone had their assigned job or role. Calhoun was loved, respected, and, at least to an extent, feared in his position as leader. There was little dissent to his rule, and few questioned the vision of salvation he offered. And my own future was bright, at least as far as it could be inside an isolated community completely cut off from the outside world. I was engaged to be married to Sonia. An arranged marriage, of course, the match being chosen by Calhoun himself. Sonia was a good woman, and I'll admit to being very fond of her, even if my heart was never truly committed to the union. It was expected for me to marry, raise children, and take on a role as a community leader. Sonia believed I was being groomed by Calhoun to take over when he was gone. The high priest was an old man and couldn't carry on forever. My future was set up in front of me, but I wasn't content. I ate powdered or canned food, breathed recycled air, worked under artificial strip lights, listened to Calhoun's repetitive sermons, and looked at murals of blue skies, green fields, and tall trees painted on the bunker's concrete walls. This had been the norm for my entire life. And yet I now felt there was something very wrong with the small and closed world I inhabited. I explained it to Sonia while we were eating our rice in the dining hall. I sat across from her, the two of us sharing our own table in a room filled with our neighbors, all of us dressed in identical light blue tracksuits. "Doesn't it strike you as odd?" I asked, catching my fiancé's eye as I spoke. "We live underground but have everything we need to live comfortably. Food, water, medicine, electricity, refrigeration, plumbing, spare parts for whatever breaks down, and even weapons to defend ourselves with. It just doesn't add up. Sonia wasn't interested in debating me, though. She merely rolled her blue eyes and flicked back her blonde hair before answering abruptly. I don't know, Eddie. Why are you always asking questions? I shrugged my shoulders while playing with my food, somewhat annoyed by her lack of support or interest. I'm just curious, that's all. Well then, you should ask the high priest. He has all the answers, she said confidently. I did ask Calhoun, and his answer made sense. He explained that our predecessors had known war was coming and built the bunker accordingly, kitting out the underground facility with all the supplies and amenities the survivors would ever need, and stocking the stores with enough supplies to last for generations. Bunker 1 was designed to facilitate the long-term survival of its inhabitants. I'll never forget the calm and confident manner in which Calhoun explained such things as he took on his paternal role, brushing back his white hair with his hand while smiling amicably through his yellow teeth. His words seemed sincere, but I'd known the old man for too long and had learned his tricks. I saw something in his face at the end of that conversation, a twinkle in his eye which told me he was lying. It was around that time when the nightmares began. Again, night terrors were nothing new for me. I'd suffered from them since childhood as a direct result of witnessing my parents die. But these dreams were different, chilling and surreal. I had the distinct feeling I was being constantly watched, with a dark, faceless figure standing over me, out of reach but observing my every move and reading my every thought. It was a chilling, terrifying feeling. Still, I might have written this all off as paranoia or perhaps cabin fever. After all, I had no real evidence and no way of proving that Calhoun's story wasn't true. That was until the rats arrived. I vividly recall the first rodent I saw while carrying out a stock take in the stores. I almost jumped out of my skin when I saw the big brown rat sitting on the shelf, bold as anything as he stared right at me. They started out in the air ducts and vents, made their way into the food stores, and eventually infiltrated the communal areas, dining hall, and even our personal bunks. This was the greatest crisis our community had faced since the invasion during my childhood. Calhoun took the infiltration very seriously. He warned the community members not to approach the troublesome rodents, claiming they were dangerous and carried diseases. The high priest organized a small team of hunters from his loyalist henchmen. They set about exterminating the rats with a murderous zeal. I didn't share Calhoun's enthusiasm for the killing spree, though. One of the rodents began following me around, a brown male rat who almost seemed tame. I first saw him in the stores, then in the offices where I was working, and finally in my bunk room. I took to feeding the rat scraps and crumbs, although I never saw him eat. Still, I didn't make any effort to harm the rodent, nor did I report his presence to the hunters. In fact, I took a liking to the small creature and looked forward to seeing him scurry out of the air vents. I even gave him a name, Roland. Roland the rat. But the wider implication of the rodent infestation wasn't lost on me. I spoke to Sonia about my theory, not in the crowded dining hall, but while we were courting in private inside her bunk, a part of the premarital ritual. I'll confess it wasn't my best pillow talk, and certainly killed the passion of the moment, but I needed to talk to someone, and I thought I could trust my fiancé. Calhoun isn't telling us the truth. You know that, don't you? Sonia shook her head in frustration, pulling the sheet up to cover her naked body. I could already tell she didn't want to have this conversation, but I persevered nonetheless, hoping I could get through to her. The rats, that's what I'm talking about. Where did they come from? From the air ducts, obviously, Sonia replied while looking down at her toes. I mean before that, I snapped, my frustration seeping through. These rodents aren't native to our bunker. That means they must have come from the surface, so if they can survive topside, then we can too. Sonia looked at me like I was crazy, sitting up in bed while her blue eyes bulged. What the hell are you talking about, Eddie? You know it's not safe out there. We'll die if we leave this bunker. That's what Calhoun says. We've trusted him blindly all these years, but the rats prove he's been lying to us." Sonia exploded at this statement, rising from the bed and standing over me wearing nothing but a white bedsheet, her eyes full of fury as she shouted me down. "This is bullshit, Eddie. I don't know what's gotten into you, but I won't stand for this talk. The high priest is our leader. He's protected me, protected you all these years. We owe him everything." I didn't have any response to her tirade, instead looking away and silently staring at the bare wall. "Damn you, Eddie," Sonia cried out while angry tears rolled down her cheeks. "Damn you to hell." With that, she stormed out of the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I knew from this moment that we'd never be man and wife. We were on entirely different wavelengths, and I couldn't trust Sonia any longer. I don't know for sure, but I strongly suspect Sonia told Calhoun about my lack of faith. The high priest asked me to stay behind after the next morning's sermon, calmly requesting that I sit and talk with him under the painted mural depicting green fields, blue skies, and an orange sun which adorned the back wall of the temple, directly behind Calhoun's pulpit. "Now then, Edward," he began, holding my gaze as he assumed the role of well-meaning patron. "What's all this I'm hearing? Honestly, I'm rather concerned about you, young man." I was taken aback, almost stuttering out my response. "I don't understand, sir." "Rats," Calhoun blurted out, louder than I would have expected from him. "You've become obsessed with these damn rats, and you've been spreading your ridiculous theories. Is this not true?" Suddenly, I felt like I was subject to an inquisition. "I was just wondering where the rats came from. Is it so wrong to ask questions?" I answered defensively. "It is when you're spreading conspiracies which cause dissent in my community," was Calhoun's firm response. "Let me tell you, Edward, these rodents do not come from the surface. Rats have lived underground with us since day one. They've come to Bunker 1 because their food supply has been exhausted. Now they've been eating through our stores and chewing up our wiring. This cannot stand, Edward. The rodent infestation is an existential threat to our community and must be stomped out." I nodded my head. It was hard to argue with the high priest's logic. Still, there was one thing I didn't understand. "You say the rats' previous food supply ran out. That means they must have come from—" "Yeah," Calhoun replied solemnly. "The rodents have migrated from Bunker 2. The mere mention of that godforsaken place brought a chill down my spine. My head was suddenly filled with nightmarish images, buried memories from my childhood of the invasion of '08, and the brutal murders of my mom and dad. Calhoun surely must have realized the impact of this revelation, and he softened his tone while speaking his next words. "It's my fault, really. I felt responsible for you since your parents died, and I've shielded you from certain uncomfortable truths. That ends now, Edward. You've been kept off the guard roster for too long, but now you must do your duty, young man. From tomorrow, you'll be working with Nicholas at the barricade. He'll show you the ropes." My jaw dropped. I was disgusted by Calhoun's instruction and realized this new duty surely was meant as a punishment. I wanted to speak out, to shout out that I wouldn't do it, but I found myself unable to speak. I simply sat defeated as Calhoun stood and began to walk away, pausing only to pat me on the back and speak in my ear. "I think this experience will be a real eye-opener for you. Good luck, Edward." Calhoun was right about that, at least. My eyes were opened during the days which followed, but not in the way the high priest had anticipated. Less than 12 hours later, and I was at my new post, shivering in the cold and dark tunnel as I took my lead from Nick. a veteran guard and Calhoun loyalist. I looked to my comrade, gray-haired and sturdy, dressed in the standard blue tracksuit and with a loaded crossbow slung over his shoulder. Nick gave the appearance of a grizzled veteran tasked with defending the border from an ever-threatened barbarian attack. He looked at me under the dim light with a mix of contempt and suspicion, and I suspected Nick wasn't happy about my arrival at his post. We stood in the front of the barricade, crudely constructed from sheet metal, and stared down the long and narrow corridor, dimly illuminated by failing lights in the unmaintained section of the vast underground complex. The tunnel was the only link between bunkers 1 and 2, and thus it had to be kept under constant guard. I had good reason to fear what lay at the far end of the tunnel, and that fear was due to the invasion of 08. That's when the Bunker 2 people had attacked en masse, piling through the narrow tunnel, pillaging and slaughtering as they came. Our side rallied under Calhoun's leadership, and eventually the attack was beaten back, but many died during the savage battle, including my mom and dad. I remember my mother telling me to hide as the invaders smashed down our door. Father tried to fight them, but there were too many. They cut down Dad first and then went for Mom. The rest is a blank in my memory. All I can remember is the blood and the bodies that wouldn't wake. It was hours before rescue finally came. We knew little about Bunker 2 and its inhabitants. They came down here at the same time we did, but something went very wrong in their community. In Bunker 1, we call ourselves the Beautiful Ones. Rather arrogant, I thought, but the name was Calhoun's idea. Meanwhile, Bunker 2's people were the Fallen, the Barbarians. While our community was well-ordered and relatively comfortable, Bunker 2 had fallen into violent anarchy. The invasion of 08 was their attempt to take what we had. They failed, and there hadn't been another attempt in the many years since. But the threat remained, and the guard had to be maintained. "Contacts are pretty rare these days," Nick explained in a gruff voice. "Occasionally 1 or 2 will come down the corridor, but they scare pretty easy. Still, they're sneaky bastards, and you always need to be on your guard." "What about the rats?" "Rats?" Nick replied in a puzzled tone. "Yeah, Calhoun said they came from Bunker 2. Well, they don't come through here," Nick said defensively. "Probably through the air ducts. Anyway, don't worry about it, kid. I'm gonna get some shut-eye. You need to take the first shift." I felt a cold shudder while glancing down the dark tunnel, focusing on a flickering light in the distance. "What happens if I see one?" Nick scoffed as he passed me the crossbow. "It's not likely, but if you do see someone approach, shout a warning. Usually that's enough to scare them off. If they keep coming, you shoot." "Shoot?" I exclaimed in shock. "We don't screw around anymore," Nick replied with a smirk. "Not since 08. Orders are shoot to kill. But don't worry, kid. Odds are you'll have a long, boring night. Just don't fall asleep, all right?" Hours passed, Nick snoring as he lay in his makeshift bunk behind the barricade while I kept watch. Nick was almost right. Most of the shift was quiet. I was a bag of nerves, jumping at every sound and shadow. But nothing happened. Until it did. During the early morning hours, I saw movement in the darkness, a shape moving through the dim light. At first, I thought my eyes were deceiving me, but then I saw a figure emerging from the shadows and running towards me. I raised the crossbow to my shoulder, trying to control my fear as I shouted out, "Don't come any closer! I'm armed!" The figure either didn't hear or didn't listen. I could see him now under the tunnel's failing lights. The interloper was a kid, maybe in his teens. He dressed in a dark red tracksuit, the standard uniform of Bunker 2 people, although I noted how his outfit was ripped and soiled. The kid himself was skinny, his skin pale and eyes filled with hunger and desperation. "Don't you hear me? Stop now and turn the hell around. I mean it." "Please don't shoot," the kid pleaded as he abruptly stopped running and held up his hands defensively. "I just want food, that's all." He was only 10 yards away from me now. A single squeeze of the trigger and the bolt would be lodged in the kid's chest. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill an unarmed young man. My hands were shaking as I clutched hold of the crossbow. We stared at each other across the gap, and for a moment everything froze. But a second later, I heard a gruff voice from my ear. Nick had woken from his slumber. "Shoot him, Eddie. He's crossed the line. You have to finish it." The kid's eyes bulged in terror as he pleaded for mercy. "I'm sorry. I just wanted food, but I'll go back." "Too late, asshole," Nick replied cruelly. "You should have listened to the first warning. Now we've got to make an example out of you. Shoot him, Eddie." But I wouldn't. "No, this isn't right. He's not a threat." "It doesn't matter," Nick replied, the fear now coming into his voice. "The high priest's orders are clear." "Calhoun wouldn't want this," I shot back, looking over my shoulder while keeping the crossbow trained on the kid. "I'll take the prisoner to him. Calhoun will show mercy. I know it." I was winging it. Didn't know what I was doing, but I couldn't let this kid die. Nick was uncertain now. He wasn't happy with this change of protocol. Clearly, it scared him. "Fine," he answered finally. "You take the prisoner back and I'll stay here. But on your head be it, Eddie." I nodded, motioning for the kid to move and noting the relief in his hungry eyes. The Bunker 2 prisoner didn't give me any problems on the march back home. I guess he was just grateful to be alive. I asked some questions but got few answers. The kid's name was Kyle. He was scared, hungry, and running from unspecified horror in his home bunker. I expected Calhoun to be angry at my disobedience, but never thought he'd take it so far. The high priest's initial fury at his midnight service being interrupted was followed by a hasty order for his henchmen to gather the entire community in the temple. All 102 of my neighbors, from the youngest infants to the elderly. I saw them all pile into the overcrowded place of worship, assembling under the mural of the great outdoors. There was Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, the nice couple who lived in the bunk next to me, with their infant son Isaiah. Beside them stood Owen, the head engineer in charge of the water purifiers, and Yasmin, the kind-hearted head teacher at the community small school. And amongst the crowd was Sonia. Our eyes met through the chaos, and I saw nothing but hostility. I realized then that something significant had changed. These were no longer my friends and neighbors. They were strangers to me now. Calhoun stood at the pulpit watching over his faithful. Meanwhile, two of his henchmen, Duncan and Mo, kept a tight hold of Kyle, the terrified prisoner from Bunker 2. As for me, I was reduced to the status of a paralyzed observer, unable to act as events played out in front of my eyes. Once the crowd had fully assembled, Calhoun cleared his throat and spoke out to capture their attention, his booming voice filling the hall. "My faithful, my children, it is with great regret that I call you here tonight. But alas, I've been left no choice." He paused, staring down at me with anger and disappointment in his hard eyes as he pointed me out to the crowd. "Brother Edward has betrayed us. Foolishly, he disobeyed orders and brought this into our fold." Duncan and Mo dragged Kyle forward. The kid tried to fight but was too weak. "This invader has come from Bunker 2, Calhoun announced with a barely concealed rage in his voice. "He is corrupted by the evil which dwells in the fallen bunker. Many of us are old enough to remember their invasion in '08, when these savages slaughtered our friends and family members without provocation or mercy." A wave of angry murmurs arose from the crowd, and more than a few hateful glares were cast in my direction. Clearly, this intruder is a spy by the barbarian leaders of Bunker 2. He cannot be allowed to return and report what he's seen. We must make an example of him. A roar of approval went up from the bloodthirsty mob. Calhoun shushed his people before calling out 6 names, ordering them up to his pulpit. There he handed them 6 daggers. It was clear what the intention was, and one of the 6 was Sonia. I cried out and tried to push forward to stop the savagery, but I was grabbed from behind and held back. The kid squirmed and begged for mercy, but he would find none. One by one, the executioner stepped forward and stabbed Kyle repeatedly in his chest and stomach. The poor kid screamed in agony, losing strength as his young blood spilled on the temple floor. When it was Sonia's turn, she paused briefly to look in my direction. Our eyes locked, and I swore I could see apprehension and fear in her pale face. Sonia didn't want to do this, but she didn't have the strength to go against the mob. I could only watch in awestruck horror as my ex-fiancé stabbed the dying Kyle in the guts, finishing the brutal ritual and ending the innocent kid's life. And I fell to my knees, crying out as angry tears rolled down my cheeks. I was surprised that they let me walk away from the murder scene. Frankly, I half expected for the mob to turn on me next. I still wonder whether they would have killed me if Calhoun gave the order. I'd grown up with these people, considered them family. Hell, Sonia was going to be my wife. But I wasn't one of them anymore. Not after that night. Still, Calhoun didn't throw me to the mob, and I was allowed to return to my bunk under their hateful glares. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I saw Kyle's brutal murder all over again. I lay on my hard mattress and stared up at the ceiling. It was hardly a surprise when I saw my bedroom door slowly open and a large figure creep in, his face hidden by the darkness. I didn't move an inch, pretending to sleep to draw the intruder into a false sense of security. I saw the knife in his hand as he slowly advanced, and then his grizzled face was illuminated by the light from the corridor. It was Nick, and he'd come here to kill me. I waited until the last possible second to move, allowing Nick to plunge his knife harmlessly into my mattress. Next, I hit Nick with all the force I could muster, knocking my would-be assassin down to my bedroom floor. A desperate life and death struggle ensued as we fought each other for supremacy. I don't know how, but somehow I got a hold of the knife and I plunged the blade into Nick's chest, through his ribcage and into his heart. Nick collapsed heavily against the wall, his eyes filled with shock and pain as a crimson tide poured from his wound. He looked up at me in the last, opening his mouth in an attempt to speak. Instead, Nick's mouth filled with blood and his eyes rolled up into his skull. And then he died. I still held the bloody knife in my shaking hand, when suddenly the bile rose up my throat and I vomited onto the floor. I'd killed a man, a member of the community. Yes, it had been in self-defense, but that wouldn't matter. There was no way back for me after this. I stumbled out of my bunk room and into the corridor, still in a daze and not sure what to do. But I didn't get far because Calhoun was out there waiting for me. The gray-haired, sharp-eyed man stood in the well-lit corridor, wearing his standard blue tracksuit and covering me with a loaded crossbow aimed at my chest. Calhoun saw the bloody knife in my hand and didn't even seem surprised. "Nicholas is dead, then," he said without much emotion. The words almost stuck in my throat as I replied, "You sent him to kill me." "Yes," Calhoun replied with a nod, while keeping his finger firmly on the trigger. "Nicholas should have taken charge of the barricade. This was his mess to clean up. But alas, he has failed." "Now you'll have to do your own dirty work," I snarled in defiance. Surely Calhoun would kill me, but yet he hesitated. "It didn't need to get to this," Calhoun said with a sad frown. "You should have kept your head down and followed the rules." He shook his head before lowering the crossbow ever so slightly. Who am I kidding?" Calhoun continued with a thin smile. "I always knew you were too smart for this charade, Edward. It was only a matter of time before you saw through the gaps. My jaw dropped as I considered the implications of his words. So you have been lying to us, I stated with some satisfaction. Calhoun gnashed his teeth before answering. Bunker 1 may be based on falsehoods, but whatever lies I've told are necessary for our continued survival. But that's irrelevant now. You're no longer a part of this community, Edward. I should shoot you down here where you stand, but I can't bring myself to do it. I'm going to give you a head start. 5 minutes before I sound the alarm. Go forth and seek the answers you desire, although I don't believe you'll like what you find. Calhoun raised his crossbow again, his eyes hardening. He was giving me a chance to live, and I was determined to take it, sprinting down the corridor and out of sight. With the bulkhead door to the surface sealed shut, there was only one other place I could go. Back to the barricade. Soon I was standing at the barrier of sheet metal and once again staring down the ominous corridor. The lights were flickering and the tunnel appeared even more foreboding. My nostrils even picked up on a foul smell coming from somewhere down there, a stink of creeping death. Every instinct in my body told me not to go down that godforsaken tunnel, but what choice did I have? I briefly considered returning to Bunker 1 and trying to persuade the others of Calhoun's deceit, but I knew this would never work. Still, I hesitated, frozen to the spot as I imagined the horrors before me. But then I saw him, Roland the rat, climbing over the barricade and squeaking at me as he made his way down the corridor. I swear my rodent companion stopped and looked back, motioning for me to follow him. And I did so, mustering the courage to cross the border and march into the unknown. Meanwhile, the sirens of Bunker 1 blared behind me, and I knew I couldn't go back. I knew next to nothing about Bunker 2 before I entered the subterranean purgatory. It was an alien place in my mind, a hostile territory where monsters dwelled. And when I reached the end of the connecting tunnel, I didn't know what to expect. As it turned out, the differences between the two bunkers were subtle at first, but became more apparent the deeper I explored. The underground shelter was a sprawling network of concrete and metal, one of seemingly endless corridors and sub-bunkers. At first inspection, it was much the same as my home in Bunker 1. Certainly, the two facilities were constructed by the same architects. Bunker 2 was significantly larger than 1, however, built to accommodate hundreds. And yet it was some time before I ran into any people, which suggested there had been a substantial population crash. Honestly, I appreciated my home the farther I progressed into the second bunker. Our facility was tidy and well-maintained. It even had touches of color in the form of the murals Calhoun had painted on our walls. Not so in Bunker 2, where the walls were gray and drab. What's more, everything over here seemed to be in a state of disrepair. From flickering or non-functional lights, leaking pipes, smashed-in doorways, and machinery broken down and left to rust. Frankly, I was amazed that the facility was still inhabitable. And yet the air was breathable and there was no significant light for me to navigate my path. More concerning were the signs of violence I witnessed. Broken barricades in lonely corridors, scorch marks on the walls, and dried blood on the floors. It brought a cold chill to my bones when I imagined the horrors that have once occurred in these halls and corridors. I saw no human beings during the first few hours of my exploration, but I wasn't alone. Roland was my companion during the trek. Sometimes the rodent disappeared from view for several hours, scuttling off into the shadows or down the pipes. But he always came back, appearing under my feet and looking up at me with his big brown eyes. It was the strangest thing, because it often seemed that Roland was guiding me, leading me deeper into the bunker and directing me towards something. Or perhaps I was just losing my sanity. In any event, it was about 6 hours before I encountered the first human resident of Bunker 2, and this meeting was not a good one. I saw the shambling figure emerging from the corridor behind me and almost jumped out of my skin. The person who emerged was an elderly woman, her hair long and white and her skin wrinkled. Her red tracksuit was ancient, worn, and hanging off her thin and frail body. She limped forward towards me with her bony hands held out, but it was her bloodshot eyes that shocked me. Eyes filled with hunger, desperation, and madness. The elderly woman wasn't much of a physical threat, but there was something about her which made me feel unsettled. I still had the knife I'd taken off Nick, but the dagger was tucked into my waistband and I was reluctant to use it again, even in self-defense. So, I attempted to resolve the situation with my words. "Hello, ma'am. Do you need help?" The woman's eyes widened and she opened her crusty lips to speak in a hoarse voice. "Hungry. I'm so hungry." I shrugged my shoulders. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any food." I watched in horror as her face twisted and she snarled her next words. "Meat. You are meat." She lurched forward aggressively and I reacted on instinct, pushing her down to the hard floor. The woman fell hard and I heard something crack. Maybe she'd broken something, but the woman's hostility towards me didn't diminish. She hissed like a cat while glaring up at me with hate in her eyes, grasping out with her claw-like hand. I'll confess that I broke in that moment, fleeing down the corridor as the fallen woman screamed after me. I left the crazed and starving lady in my wake, but was left wondering what had happened in Bunker 2 and how far its people had fallen. Unfortunately, I soon got my answer. Another corridor with flickering lights, except there was a foul smell down there. A rancid stink of rotting flesh. I shouldn't have gone down there. Of course, there was something horrific at the end of the corridor, but I needed to know the truth no matter how terrible it would be. Advancing cautiously into the darkness while holding my nose, I soon found the source of the stench. Because there, in an abandoned bunk room set off the dimly lit corridor, was a human corpse. The body was badly mutilated, so much so that I couldn't tell the victim's gender. The skin and much of the flesh was stripped away, exposing the white bones underneath. The sight and smell were so bad that I retched, but nothing came up because my stomach was already empty. I hadn't seen a dead body in many years, not since my parents were murdered. And even then, the victims of the '08 invasion were dealt with compassionately and efficiently, burnt in the incinerator, as was the tradition in Bunker 1. But leaving a body out to rot seemed barbaric to me. That wasn't the worst of it, though. I forced myself to observe the bloody corpse in closer detail, hoping to find some evidence on the cause of death. At first, I assumed the victim had been eaten by rats. But no. The flesh hadn't been torn apart with teeth. It had been carefully sliced from the bone by a knife. The victim hadn't just been murdered, they'd been butchered. I stumbled away from the bloody scene, my whole body shaking as I was overwhelmed by feelings of revulsion and terror. The implication was obvious. The Bunker 2 people I'd encountered were starving, so clearly food was in short supply over here. But now I realized how bad it got. Clearly, there were some who'd resorted to cannibalism. I experienced an existential dread in that moment as I fled from the scene. I'd sought out the truth. Calhoun told me I wouldn't like what I found, and he was right. How foolish I'd been. Life in Bunker 1 had been a lie, but it was safe and comfortable back home. Here, it was a living hell, worse than I could have imagined. Why had I come here? Why didn't I keep my mouth shut and follow Calhoun's rules? I regretted my disobedience now, but it was too late to go back. I guess I was still in a shocked daze as I stumbled farther into the damned bunker because I didn't spot the ambush until it was too late. 2 figures darted out in front of me, blocking my path. I took a step back and instinctively made to retreat, but another 2 had crept up behind me, boxing me in. I reached into my waistline and withdrew my knife, even though I had little to no hope of defending myself against this quartet. Observing my opponents, I noted that they were all female, young women in red tracksuits. All 4 were lean and thin, but they shared a fierce and determined look, and all were armed with long steel javelins which were aimed menacingly in my direction. These were tough women in the mold of Amazonian warriors. I had no doubt they could and would kill me if it came to a fight. Nevertheless, I continued to hold out my knife in a futile act of defiance. 3 of the women held the line with their spears, while the 4th, their leader, marched forward to confront me. My heart almost dropped when I saw her. I almost called out a name before I caught my mistake. Because this female warrior was the spitting image of Sonia, my ex-fiancée. Sure, this red-coated woman was leaner, tougher, and more determined, but she had Sonia's eyes, hair, and facial features. I was awestruck and speechless as the blonde-haired woman approached, holding out her spear as she came. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded. I opened my dry lips and somehow found the words to reply. "Eddie. My name is Eddie." The lead woman nodded her head, as if my first name was all the information she needed, but her companions weren't convinced. "Cass, don't listen to him," shouted a dark-haired woman behind me. "He's with the Rat Pack. Has to be." "No," Cass said firmly, her hard eyes still focused upon me. "He's not Rat Pack. Look at his uniform, light blue. You're from Bunker 1, aren't you, Eddie?" I nodded my head in confirmation. "Bunker 1?" asked a third woman in confusion. "Why would you leave to come here?" I looked to Cass, but she said nothing, as clearly she expected me to answer. I had to leave. Got in trouble with the high priest. There was nowhere else to go. "That's bullshit," cried the 4th woman. "He's a damn spy." "Maybe he is," Cass answered thoughtfully. "But we'll bring him back to camp to find out for sure." She nodded to the knife still in my hand. "I suggest you drop that, Eddie, unless you intend to take us all on." I inhaled, thinking for a moment before dropping the blade, hearing it clatter on the hard ground. Cass seemed appreciative of my cooperation. She lessened her grip on the spear and grabbed a bottle from her belt, casually tossing it into my waiting hands. "Take a drink, Eddie. I'm sure you can use one." I smiled while opening the bottle and drinking the cold water contained within. I thought I'd found a friend in Cass, but had no idea what awaited me back at the Amazon camp. The Bunker 2 settlement was based in a dining hall similar to the one we had back home. But while our hall was a place of peace and community, this was a room of desperation and hunger. I noted several things while I was frog-marched through the hall by the 4 female warriors. There were about 50 or 60 people spread throughout the space, sitting at steel tables while staring longingly towards the canteen. I witnessed how the children were the only ones active, and they were out of control, almost feral as they fought each other with food trays and jumped all over the tables. Their mothers made no effort to control their offspring, merely watching them with dead eyes and indifference. And it was only mothers. There were hardly any adult males, and the few men I could see were elderly and unresponsive. It seemed that this small community was run and protected by women, and this puzzled me. My curiosity got the better of me as I whispered the question to Cass, who strode by my side. "What happened to all the men?" Cass simply shrugged her shoulders before responding. "Dead, mostly. Killed each other in vendettas and duels. Those who survived ran off to join the Rat Pack, and those bastards have been wreaking bloody mayhem for years." I took note of her words, but made no further comment. This was the second time I'd heard mention of the Rat Pack. I didn't know who they were, but guessed this group were bad news. I did notice how I received suspicious and hostile looks from many in the assembled crowd, and this brought back painful memories of my treatment in Bunker 1. But I tried to reassure myself that these people were simply curious. In any event, my attention was soon drawn to the canteen at the back of the hall, where a trio of beleaguered caterers emerged with trays of food. The community members responded with great enthusiasm as they piled forward, but Cass and her warriors were there to keep control. "You know the drill," Cass commanded. "Everyone will be served. Stand in line and wait your turn." There were grumbles from the crowd, but they eventually complied, forming an untidy line as they queued up for their breakfast. Cass tapped me on the shoulder, smiling while asking, "You hungry?" I nodded my head and allowed her to lead me to the back of the line, although I noted the harsh glares from those in front of me. The hostility only grew worse as I reached the front of the line and was served food by a hard-faced dinner lady. I glanced at the tiny portion of beans dished out to me and thought I was being deliberately underserved. But when I looked to the other plates, I saw we'd all received the same meager offering. There was rationing in Bunker 1, of course, but our stocks were ample, and we didn't have to survive on starvation rations like these. And as I ate, I realized why the crowd was so hostile.
"Why the hell does he get to eat?"
cried a middle-aged woman who pointedly accused me.
"Our children are starving. We don't have enough room for another mouth,"
shouted another. Once again, an angry mob was turning against me. I started to back away, setting down my plate in the process, but thankfully Cass stepped in to defend me.
"Come on, people. Eddie is our guest. I invited him." "He's an outsider from Bunker 1,
cried out the dark-haired warrior.
"We can't trust him."
The suspicious murmurs escalated, and I could tell the situation was getting out of control. So I held up my hands defensively and spoke. "I'm not staying, just passing through. I don't want any trouble."
"Yes,"
Cass added.
"He's leaving and I'm escorting him out."
This seemed to quell the mob's anger as they slowly drifted away and returned to their food. Meanwhile, Cass took me to one side and picking up her javelin before handing me back my knife.
"I know some people who can maybe help you, but we need to be careful because we'll be traveling through their territory."
I nodded my head, wondering who Cass was referring to and what dangers lay ahead. But I couldn't stay here, and I had no choice but to trust her. We walked out from the dining hall and proceeded deeper into the subterranean labyrinth. I was nervous, but experienced a moment of joy when I spotted Roland scurrying across the floor ahead of us. It was the first time I'd seen the rodent in some time, and his presence brought me renewed hope. But I didn't say anything to Cass, instead waiting for her to start the conversation.
"So, why did you leave?"
she asked abruptly, as we negotiated yet another featureless corridor under failing lights.
"Huh?"
I said in confusion, looking at her.
"Bunker 1. Why did you leave? Are they running out of food? Or has the High Priest lost control?"
Not exactly," I replied, before reluctantly recounting the grisly tale of Kyle's brutal execution following his capture at the barricade. Cass didn't seem shocked or angered by my story. Instead, she merely nodded her head in grim resignation, as if such acts of brutal violence were a fact of everyday life.
"You know, Bunker 2 wasn't always like this,"
she said thoughtfully as we continued to walk.
"When I was a girl, this place was well-ordered and peaceful, and we had enough food for everyone."
"So, what happened?" Cass shook her head, trying to control her emotions as she answered.
"People got greedy, wanted more than their fair share. There was fighting, and half our food stores were looted or destroyed. We've been hungry ever since."
Something suddenly clicked in my head. When did this happen?
"Back in 2008.
You people invaded us that year, slaughtered us."
"We were desperate. All we wanted was food,"
Cass replied defensively. "My mom and dad were murdered that day." Cass took a deep breath, acknowledging my pain when she spoke next.
"I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your loss, Eddie. Our people went too far. But you've got to understand, we all suffer under the same system. And Calhoun, your leader, he knew we were starving and didn't lift a finger to help."
I nodded. This latest revelation was disappointing but not surprising. There was something which still puzzled me. This talk of a system that kept everyone down.
"Where are you taking me?" "I'm bringing you to another community, one that I think can help you and give you the answers you need."
I wanted to ask more, but Cass stopped us dead in our tracks. Her attention was drawn by a suspicious sight or sound.
"Stop. Wait."
I didn't know what Cass was reacting to, but a second later an arrow flew past my ear, striking the wall directly behind me. I reacted with stunned shock, realizing I'd only been inches from death. But Cass shook me from my paralysis, grabbing my arm and shouting, "Run!"
She took off down the corridor and I followed, but we didn't make it far. A bulky figure emerged from behind a corner, striking Cass hard with a lead pipe. I stopped abruptly to face the attacker, only to be hit from behind, feeling a sharp pain in my back which forced me down to my knees. A moment later, and both Cass and I were being roughly dragged across the ground by a gang of men, thugs who cursed and laughed as they inflicted pain. They flung us inside an empty storeroom, and only then could I comprehend this grim situation. Cass and I had been ambushed, disarmed, beaten, and taken prisoner, all in a matter of seconds. 3 men were blocking the only exit from the room, a trio of fat, sweaty thugs with sadistic smirks on their lips and murder in their eyes. They all wore the standard Bunker 2 red tracksuits, but their outfits were customized by grotesque trophies, human teeth and digits hanging from strings around their necks. I looked to Cass, who lay on the floor beside me, and saw genuine fear in her blue eyes. I didn't know who these men were, but could hazard a guess. The infamous Rat Pack, hunters and cannibals of Bunker 2. A moment later, and 3 thugs stood aside, allowing another 2 to enter the cell. The first man appeared to be the gang's leader. He had a deep scar across his cheek and a mean look in his dark eyes. Sadistic, but also intelligent. But what I noted was the crude tin crown he wore on his bald head, an unsubtle symbol of his power and position. The second man trailed behind the Rat King, and somehow his appearance was even more shocking. He was a short and ugly man with wild hair, but the real problem was what he carried on his back. A rucksack with appendages sticking out from the top. 2 severed human legs.
"Well, my liege," the ferret-faced man sniveled, "we're going to have a feast tonight."
"Oh, no," the Rat King replied, his cruel grin widening as he looked down upon us.
"This is Cass, Queen of the Amazons. We've been after her for a long time. Going to have some fun with this bitch before she dies."
Then he turned to me.
"And this asshole, he's from Bunker 1. Oh yes, I recognize the uniform. Many of my men have died trying to get past that damn barricade. But now we have leverage. A hostage."
He snarled an order to his men.
"Get them up on their feet and back to camp.
The Rat King didn't have a chance to finish his sentence, because a second later, an arrow penetrated the skull of the man behind him. Suddenly, pandemonium broke out in the corridor as the Rat Pack piled out with weapons in hand. From our cell, I saw a second man fall with a javelin in his chest, and then the survivors broke and fled.
"Let's go! Grab the meat and run!"
shouted one of them. The Rat King cast us a hateful glare before retreating. A moment later, and our saviors arrived in the doorway. Our rescuers were a trio, and what interested me was how they wore their uniforms that were a mixture of red and blue. 2 of the 3 warriors were young, a red-haired woman armed with a crossbow, and a man with olive skin who removed his spear from the chest of a dead cannibal. But their leader was an older man with gray hair, his brown eyes tired but still holding a spark of compassion. He smiled in recognition while holding out his hand to help Cass up to her feet.
"Thanks for saving our asses, Joe."
"Not a problem. Glad to help. But you were damn lucky we got here when we did." He frowned like a disapproving father. "What are you doing out here, Cass?"
"I was bringing him to see you guys," she answered while nodding towards me. "Calhoun kicked him out of the Beautiful Ones. Now he wants answers."
"Is that so?" Joe said with a raised eyebrow as he looked me up and down. "Well, we best get moving. The Rat King's been given a bloody nose, but he'll return looking for payback. We need to get underground. Then I'll tell this young man everything I know." I got up on my feet, relieved to still be alive and intrigued at what this new faction would reveal to me. We escaped quickly from the killing zone, fleeing before the Rat Pack cannibals returned. Joe and his people led the way, while Cass and I followed, both of us grateful to still be in one piece. I expected to see yet more bland corridors and halls, but Joe's faction didn't bring us to another section of the hellish Bunker 2, because they didn't live in the bunker. They lived under it. Turning another corner, I was shocked to see a tunnel leading downwards. Panels had been removed from the bunker floor, and a passageway had been dug into the earth. I hesitated for a second as Joe and his warriors descended into the hole, but Cass followed and I went with her. I don't know how they built the tunnel network which sprawled underneath the bunker complex, but clearly much work and planning had gone into its construction. The main tunnels were wide and tall enough for two fully grown adults to walk side by side. The support beams appeared sturdy and secure, and electric lights were mounted to the walls, wired up to a power source which I guess was located inside the bunker above. Set beside the main tunnel were rooms and halls, some appearing substantial in size. Guards were posted at intersections, and I saw people, including whole families, living underground. Ironically, this lower level seemed safer and more peaceful when compared to the chaos and savagery in the bunker above. We eventually arrived at a central hall where Joe invited us to sit, while his people served us water in tin mugs. I looked around at the red and blue-clad tunnel people, the dirt walls, and electric lights. Honestly, I felt overwhelmed by this new environment, but then I saw a familiar creature scurrying across the floor which brought me some comfort. It was Roland, my rodent companion who'd followed me all the way from Bunker 1. I smiled when I saw the rat approach, but was shocked by what happened next, as one of Joe's men rushed forward and brutally smashed Roland's tiny body with a heavy club. It was crazy, but I reacted with anger, jumping up and remonstrating with the club-wielding thug. "Why did you do that? He was an innocent creature!" The man scoffed, but it was Joe who answered. "Look closer, Eddie." I did so, observing what remained of the crushed rodent. I expected to see blood and guts, but instead saw wires and circuit boards. This discovery left me shocked and confused. "I don't understand." Joe and Cass walked up beside me, and neither appeared surprised. "It's not an animal. It's a machine. A remotely controlled service unit sent by the topside controllers." "The controllers?" I repeated in bafflement. Joe and Cass shared a knowing look before the old man spoke. "You best sit down, Eddie. We got a lot to talk about." I did as instructed, feeling like I was through the looking glass. Honestly, I was afraid of what I was about to hear, but also exhilarated because the truth was finally in sight. "You know Calhoun?" "Of course, I was one of his favorites once upon a time, but then he cast me out." "Yeah, Calhoun and I were close friends for many years. We were both part of the first generation. Not many of us left now, sadly." I raised my eyebrow in surprise. "You lived topside before the war?" "We did, but there was no war." My jaw dropped in disbelief. "No war? That doesn't make sense. Why else would you have gone below ground?" "We didn't come here voluntarily," Joe said solemnly while lowering his head. "They put us here, trapped us in these bunkers and sealed off the doors. Why? Nobody knows for sure. Our best bet is some kind of experiment." He paused, pointing to the shattered remains of the robotic rodent. "We removed the surveillance cameras years ago, but they've become more sophisticated in keeping tabs on us. Our group moved underground in an attempt to escape their watchful eyes, not to mention the violence and chaos in Bunker 2. I suppose you could call our jailers benevolent. They provided ample food, water, and supplies to support a growing population. Much of the suffering inside the bunkers has been of our own doing. Take the Rat Pack as an example." My head was spinning and I felt like I could vomit. What Joe was saying sounded insane, and yet it all made sense to me. But there was still one thing I didn't understand. "Calhoun, he's a part of it then? He's running the experiment?" Joe shook his head. "No. Calhoun's a prisoner just like the rest of us. The Beautiful Ones was his way of trying to take back control. His cult is built on a lie, as you can now see. To be fair to my old friend, he did what he thought necessary to keep order in his bunker,
But in the end, the truth will always come out. I zoned out after this, unable to focus on Joe's words. Eventually, the old man left me be as I tried to process my thoughts. But Cass sat by my side, letting some compassion seep through her tough exterior as she put her arm around my shoulder, smiled, and spoke softly in my ear. "You okay, Eddie?" I opened my mouth but couldn't find the words to respond. It didn't matter, though, because a moment later it all went to hell. Suddenly, a man ran into the underground hall, bleeding from what looked like a stab wound as he shouted frantically, "It's the Rat Pack! They've broken through!" Suddenly, every man and woman jumped into action, grabbing hold of weapons and preparing to defend their home turf. Cass and I joined their defensive line, and even the elderly Joe took up arms. We could hear the clash of steel weapons echoing through the tunnels, and the screams of men and women struck down. And then the enemy charged inside the hall, the Rat King and a dozen of his men, their spears and blades dripping with the blood of their enemies. Their leader stood at the head of the mob, his crazed eyes full of bloodlust as he scanned the crowd, searching for targets. Meanwhile, the tunnelers joined the battle. Bolts and spears flew through the air. Men fell screaming, and the survivors fought hand to hand. I lost track of my companions during the melee. Cass was fighting a weasel-faced attacker and holding her own, but Joe was soon in trouble. The Rat King went straight for the tunneler's elderly leader, and poor Joe didn't stand a chance. I saw the old man fall with a knife through his heart. The hideous Rat King howled in triumph as Joe fell, the life draining from his tired old eyes. My heart was filled with fury in that moment as I charged forward, knife in hand. The Rat King was taken off guard. I don't think he was used to his victims fighting back. He saw me late and turned slowly, but I hit him hard, burying my blade in his throat. Shock and pain filled the monster's eyes as blood sprayed from the opened wound in his neck. He stumbled across the floor for a few seconds until his blood loss was overwhelming, and then he collapsed into a heap in the dirt. The battle continued around me for several more seconds, but then the surviving Rat Pack members saw their leader was dead and their morale broke. "The boss is dead meat! Let's get out! Let's get the hell out!" The surviving attackers fled, leaving their dead behind. Cass and I stood side by side, looking down at Joe's lifeless body. And in that moment, I realized that something had to change. Weeks passed before we made our move. The deaths of Joe and the Rat King had left a power vacuum in Bunker 2, one which Cass and I were able to take advantage of. It took time to reach out to all the factions and bring them under one flag. A difficult, nearly impossible task, but we managed it. Cass's Amazons, the tunnelers, the ferals, and even the surviving Rat Packers. Former enemies had become allies, and what brought them together was one thing: the truth. We spent time waiting for the right moment to strike. I wanted to avoid more bloodshed if at all possible. Cass and I watched the barricade for several nights, waiting until both guards were asleep before moving in quietly, overpowering and restraining both men and taking them prisoner. With this task completed, our ragtag army moved in. Calhoun had become complacent. It had been so long since the last significant attack upon Bunker 1, and their defenses were weak. His second mistake was letting me live. I'm sure Calhoun thought I'd die over there in Bunker 2. He certainly didn't expect me to come back with an army behind me. And I had the advantage that Bunker 2 people didn't: knowledge. I had grown up in Bunker 1, so I knew the layout, the people, and the routines. We came in while the beautiful ones were asleep, taking them off guard. By the time my former neighbors emerged from their bunks, it was already too late. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but I'd given my soldiers strict orders not to kill. The Bunker 1 community were in a state of shock and astonished to see me back. Sonia was amongst their number. There was anger in her eyes when she saw me, and I felt sure my ex-fiancé would speak out. But all Sonia's hatred seemed to melt away once she locked eyes with Cass, because the two women were sisters, separated at a young age but now reunited. And they weren't the only ones. The peoples of Bunkers 1 and 2 had been enemies for years, but this was an artificial divide, and ultimately we were all from the same place. But Calhoun wasn't willing to accept this. The high priest marched into the dining hall where we'd assembled the prisoners. His enforcers, Mo and Duncan, stood by his side, and all three were armed with daggers.
It seemed Calhoun wasn't ready to give up. He looked at me with disappointment in his old eyes, shaking his head as he spoke.
Edward, what have you done?
But this judgmental father routine wouldn't work on me. Not anymore. I didn't respond to Calhoun, instead speaking directly to the Bunker 1 folk. This man has been lying to you for years. Yeah, he may have had his reasons, but he's a liar nonetheless. There was no war. The surface isn't uninhabitable. The truth is, we're prisoners. Our forefathers were trapped down here decades ago. Anonymous controllers have been watching us ever since, observing us like we're rats in a damned maze. And this divide? Bunker 1 versus Bunker 2? It's meaningless. We are brethren, all from the same stock, and we're all victims of the same cruel system. Only by working together can we break the wheel. I've been practicing this speech in my head for weeks, but honestly, I didn't know how it would be received. Would the beautiful ones continue to deny reality? Would they remain loyal to Calhoun and his false vision? I looked around the faces of the people I'd grown up with and saw the doubt creeping in. It seemed there had been cracks for some time, and now it was all crumbling down. I expected Calhoun to call me the liar and defend what he'd spent his entire life building. The old man opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. He looked exhausted and defeated, and perhaps even relieved that it was all over. The final blow was when Duncan and Mo, his most loyal enforcers, dropped their weapons and came over to our side. I had won, but I didn't hate the fallen priest. I felt sorry for him. "You can still join us, Calhoun," I exclaimed in an attempt at reconciliation. "You're a victim of this system too. Help us find a way out." Calhoun laughed bitterly, waving his knife in the air as he spoke.
You stupid boy. You still don't get it, do you? There is no way out. You've no idea what you're unleashing.
It's over, Calhoun. This is happening whether you like it or not. I honestly didn't anticipate what Calhoun would do. If I had any inkling, I would have tried to stop him. But he acted too quickly, such was the former high priest's determination.
"I won't be a part of this,"
he cried out in defiance. Then, Calhoun raised the knife to his neck and sliced his throat from ear to ear. Cass, Sonia, and I ran to his side, but it was already too late. Calhoun choked on his own blood and the life went out of his eyes. I hadn't wanted anyone to die, but Calhoun had made his own choice. His action wouldn't stop us. We all marched as one now. Beautiful ones, Amazons, tunnelers, and Rat Pack. All united with a common goal: to break the system and escape from this man-made hell. There was only one place to go: the bulkhead doors. The steel barrier separating us from the surface. We didn't know how to break out, not yet, but together we would work it out. We marched as one down the final corridor, our goal in sight. But the controllers must have anticipated this scenario. I saw one, then two, then three rats emerging from the vents in the walls and ceiling. Except they weren't rats. They were the same model as Roland, surveillance drones. But this wasn't their only purpose. Within moments there were dozens, then hundreds. They emerged from every crevice, coming in front and behind, soon surrounding our party. The mechanical killers surged forward in a deadly wave, opening their maws to reveal rows of razor-sharp steel teeth. One of our number fell, bit on the ankles and shin before being overwhelmed by a swarm of ruthless attackers who tore him apart. People screamed and tried to flee in a blind panic, knocking others down and crushing them in a stampede. Meanwhile, the rats kept on coming, tearing into human flesh. Many of our people fought back, smashing and slicing robotic rats with clubs and machetes. But there were so many of them. Soon it descended into a bloodbath as Calhoun's grim warnings came to fruition. Cass, Sonia, and I formed a defensive ring, protecting the children as we prepared to fight the desperate last stand. Our plan was a disaster, as the system had fought back with unprecedented brutality. And yet, as I faced a likely death, I felt surprisingly calm. Because although we might die today, at least we would die free. No longer prisoners, dwelling in the darkness. Hey everybody, Kevin here from Nightmares Nightly. This is a story from one of my favorite authors, Woundlicker, aka Hell Tourist, aka Traveler, aka Finn McCool, and real name Mark Lynch. If you enjoyed this story, he's got plenty on the channel. Visit my playlist, Stories by Woundlicker. I think there's over 30 in there. Also, I'm going to leave one of his recent books down in the description down below, and if I remember, I'm going to leave it in a pinned comment as well. Check out his book. It is a story about hell, and it is full of adventure, let's say. He's a horror author, so it's really cool. I love his hell stories. They're some of the best out there. Please give it a look. And I think there might be a audio version out there, or maybe it's not out yet, but if there isn't yet, it will be at some point. Please give it a look and support the authors. It helps support this channel and channels like mine grow. Mark Lynch is a friend of the channel, and I keep in contact with him often, and he's a super cool guy. And as always, thanks for listening, everybody. There's a storm coming. Are you ready? The stranger asked. I couldn't see his face as he was hidden by the darkness. I could make out his mouth to a point, his pure white teeth almost glowing through the pitch-black surroundings. A storm? Why do I need to be ready for that?
It is not the storm, but what awaits within you should fear. Are you ready for that? Are you prepared to stay?
I don't understand. Why can't you just tell me what... I felt my words catch in my throat. I was unable to convince them to even reach my mouth, let alone escape out into the world. Though I had been unable to see anything at first when the sky lit up with such vibrant flashes of lightning, I could make out the silhouette of the man. He just stood in place, holding a black umbrella above his head, still shielding his appearance from me. When the scarlet rain began to cast down upon us, I no longer attempted to focus on the stranger, only on the heavy blood-like drops as they quickly formed pools around our feet.
A decision must be made. Once you choose, your fate is sealed.
When my eyes blinked open, I was sitting straight up in my bed, momentarily confused and somewhat dazed. The dream felt more real and at the same time more surreal than any I had ever experienced. I could still hear that deeply haunting voice reverberating against my eardrums, as though he stood in the corner of my bedroom still holding his umbrella. I chalked it up to nothing more than good old-fashioned nerves, with this being my first day of a new job. I'd done some security work here and there over the past few years, so I assumed my new responsibilities as a bona fide park ranger wouldn't be much different. I'd been through orientation and the like over the previous days, even though I would only be a glorified temp until I could prove one way or another that I could handle the full-time responsibilities. After the meet and greet with the others who worked the morning shift, Slade, the guy they referred to as the Chief or simply Cap, called me back into his office. He was an older guy, maybe around 50 or so, but he was a good bit taller than me and quite stocky. He looked like someone you don't want to be disrespectful or rude to. I most definitely didn't want to get on his bad side anyway. We talked back and forth for a while, just shooting the shit and getting to know each other a bit. He asked if I saw this as something I could see myself making a lifelong career out of, but I couldn't give him a straight answer on that. It was my first day after all. He seemed understanding to my stuttered reply when I tried to come up with something to say to his question at least. Once the small talk was out of the way, he got up from his seat, shook my hand, and led me towards the door to his office. He reached out for the latch before hesitating, glancing over to me and placing his hand on my shoulder.
Once you see them, they see you too,
he told me, staring into my eyes with such intensity I felt my spine stiffen. Huh?
There are a lot of strange things out there, but nothing else like them. You best be sure you want to stick around before the rain comes.
I'm sorry, sir. I don't know what you're...
Get a feel for the job, get the routines down, and get to know the rest of the guys. We're a family around here. More so than that.
I just continued to stare back at him, feeling more puzzled by the second. To be honest, I thought he was just messing with me, hazing the new guy and all. Still, he was getting up in years, so I thought he may well have been a bit... well, I was sure he meant well anyway.
There's a storm a-comin', son. Best be sure before it gets here,
he said, finally pulling the door open. His words instantly flashed me back to the bizarre dream from the night before, but I was certain it was nothing more than a coincidence. There had been something of a drought of late. I couldn't even remember the last time it rained, so it had to come sooner or later. I just chalked the shared sentiment between my new boss and the stranger in my dream as nothing more than my subconscious longing for the rain to come and cool off the world some. He handed me a set of keys, warning me to never be without them. The keychain that dangled from the 8 or so keys of various shapes and sizes was the same unusual symbol that was mounted to the outside wall of the ranger station. I didn't pay much attention at the time, as I assumed it simply represented whatever company may own or operate things around these parts. But I would learn to damn sure do what he advised, and keep them on me at all times. As that first week progressed, I grew to very much enjoy the job, as well as the company of my fellow employees. Since I had technically signed on for seasonal work, there was potential for it becoming a full-time thing, so I tried to learn everything I could to give myself a better shot. I worked at staggered shifts those first few weeks, working with just about all the other rangers to get all the different perspectives. They were a friendly group, but Rick, the graveyard shift guy, was a bit twitchy and nervous for someone hovering right about 30 years old. He was a slender, shaggy-haired guy, but he looked like he had some muscle on him. There were scars up and down the length of both of his forearms, but I assumed that may have been from his time overseas, and likely a factor for his troubled mind. "You hear some crazy shit out here when the sun goes down," he said more than once over the days we worked together. "What kind of crazy shit?" I asked, honestly quite curious as to what would qualify as such given all the wildlife around. "Hard to say, really. Just, I don't know, unnatural, I suppose." "But, I mean, like, how so? Weird animal noises? Squealing tires of cars and such? Maybe people messing around? What?" I guess a bit of everything in a way, you know?" Nope, don't know," I replied with a laugh. "You'll understand when you see 'em," he said, attempting to laugh with me. "Kinda open your eyes some, though. Best if you don't, see 'em." "Who are they?" I asked, making air quotes with my fingers. Cap said something about them on my first day, but... "Can't say what they are, on account of the fact I don't really know. Can't even see 'em, all the time, just when it rains, I guess. I know they're there, though. Can feel 'em looking back at me. Just..." He sort of drifted off while he spoke, just gazing out the window. Whether he was looking at them out there in the dark, I didn't know. In all honesty, I didn't buy it at all. That something out there was only visible in the rain, but Rick looked troubled. Craig, one of the early shift boys, told me that Rick had some lingering PTSD from his time in Afghanistan, and he wasn't all there anymore. For the most part, he seemed like a good dude, but he had seen some shit. His eyes revealed that much. Were it not for Captain Slade having dropped the warning about the elusive them when I started, I wouldn't pay Rick's words any mind. But it had most certainly piqued my curiosity. "Are they dangerous?" I asked after the room fell silent for a while. Not sure, honestly. But some of the other things are. All kind of things out there. Gets more clear when you see 'em, though. The more he spoke in his almost frustrating riddles, the more uneasy I felt. Not from the elusive them, but from Rick's seemingly troubled mind. Fortunately, the shift had almost reached its end by this point. I had grown more awkward and somewhat uncomfortable the longer we shared each other's company. So when the clock chimed to signify the morning crew should be arriving any minute, I almost jumped to my feet to ready my escape. Before I signed on for seasonal work, I hadn't realized what sort of schedule I may be working. I'd been to various campsites and parks before and witnessed a few ranger stations closing up shop for the night around 7 or 8. Had I understood that this particular area required 24-hour supervision, for some reason, I'm not entirely sure if I would have gone for it. But it would seem like I would be fluctuating my hours at least. Over the following weeks, I completed my training, grew far more familiar with most of the trails and more populated hiking spots, and had begun to feel like a solid part of the team. Being the new guy, I was still working a different shift each week, but I was okay with that. I would still have plenty of time off, plus guaranteed at least one full weekend off a month. Sure, the job didn't pay quite as much as I would like, but I would apparently get a healthy raise after becoming a full-time employee. Cap assured me it was entirely in my own hands, whether or not I wanted to become a permanent member, though I wasn't exactly sure what he meant by that. If I chose to just stick with part-time, my time with the Rangers would come to an end by around September, so I had a lot to think about. I'd worked the job for about 2 months by the time I had yet another uncomfortable conversation, but I had already grown quite accustomed to such things. When the chief called me into his office, the expression he wore made me think he was about to fire my ass for a moment. It looked almost like he was intending to give me a piece of his mind, rather than asking if I'd come to a decision yet. That's how it felt to me at the time, anyway.
So, how committed to this job are you?
He asked, staring me down as though it was some sort of interrogation. I care about the job a lot, if that's what you're asking. Not to, butter my own popcorn too much, but I feel as though I've proved I can handle everything you guys have handed me so far.
Yeah. The team has got nothing but good things to say about you, and you seem quite outgoing with the public and such. But that's not entirely what I'm asking.
I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not sure what you're getting at.
You understand why we close off the trails and damn near seal off the whole mountain when there's storms brewing?
Well, yeah. It's too dangerous out there when it's wet, right?
Yes, but also...
Them, right? I said with a sigh. I know. Supposedly you can only see them when...
Ain't no supposedly about it, son. I know you got your doubts, and I don't blame you none. But if you do intend on making this a full-time thing, you're gonna learn. You need to be sure.
I don't know what to tell you, sir. With all due respect, and please understand that I do have the utmost respect for you, but all this them stuff? I don't know, it sounds like some crazy superstition or something. He just looked up at me from his chair, drumming his fingers across the wood of his desk. Judging by the especially faded and worn section his fingertips bounced against at the time, it would appear he had been performing this very ritual for years.
You've certainly proven yourself, son. I can't deny that. Every task we've given you, you've performed admirably. But there's still so much more to our responsibilities than what you've seen so far.
Oh, I don't doubt that, I said with a laugh. I'd be one arrogant son of a bitch if I thought I had everything down in just a couple of months.
That's the thing, though. You ain't even seen a hint of what we're really here for. Not yet, anyway.
Again, we shared the silence as we gazed at one another. He had such intensity in his eyes, but I still couldn't fathom where he was going with any of this. Yes, I had no doubt there would be far more trying times ahead of me, should I decide to stick around. But how bad could it be?
I'd already had to lend a hand in breaking up a bit of a scuffle between a few campers who knocked back a few too many. Some of the guys and I even had to deal with a drug deal that was taking place behind the trees, but I handled that okay. Those fellas tried to get physical with us, and I held my own even if I did take a few hits. Still, should things get more out of hand than anything I'd seen over those first few weeks, I was certain I could deal with it. I'd seen my fair share of scraps when I was younger, even had to defend my little sister against our drunk father more than once. So I'm no stranger to either tough times or hard decisions.
Supposed to rain this weekend,
The chief said, finally breaking the uncomfortable silence.
You okay with working Saturday and Sunday?
Yeah, shouldn't be a problem at all, I replied, fully aware that I couldn't expect to have every weekend to myself.
I want you on the graveyard shift for the next few days, too. You all right with that?
Yeah, sure thing.
You think about how you see your place here. When the rain comes, if it's while you're on the job, really think about it. You want to stay and be a part of this? Take a look outside. If not, might be best to just turn on the TV and tune out the world for a time.
I wasn't exactly psyched to work the late shift, nor was I thrilled about sharing the office with Rick again, but I had a feeling Cap was testing me. I still hadn't given him a yay or nay on the ready for full-time question yet, but I was interested. I couldn't deny the strange superstitions of the group that had made me a bit uneasy, but I still liked everyone I had worked with so far, even Rick, when he wasn't being so, well, dramatic, I suppose. To my surprise, when I came to work the following night, it would seem I would be working alone. On one hand, it was quite intimidating to be left to my own devices for the first time, but on the other, it would be incredibly peaceful to have the place to myself. The times I'd worked the night shift before, little to nothing happened, other than the occasional phone call or making rounds to pass the time. It had already begun to sprinkle during my drive to work, and I had to manually open the main gates at the base of the mountain, as they had already shut everything down for the storm. When I rolled into the station, Sarah and James had made a little small talk, before almost ordering me to give them a call if anything came up. James is a pretty big black guy, even taller and more stocky than the chief. He's super friendly and almost carefree in the way he carries himself, though he looks like the type who would fit right in as a bouncer at one of the more popular hotspots in the city. Sarah's maybe a half-foot shorter than me, but very pretty, with big hazel anime eyes and curly dark hair. She comes off as really sweet and friendly, but I get the feeling she could kick some serious ass if a situation called for it. Given how quiet everything had grown outside, I assured them they had nothing to worry about. I didn't want to just flat out admit that I would likely just take a nap after a while, as I didn't see myself making rounds in the rain. Also, with the day shift having seemingly run everyone off the mountain before the first drop hit the ground, I was certain it'd be a peaceful night.
If you do go out there,
Sarah said, wearing the expression of a mother lecturing her child,
make sure you've got your keys with you.
Oh yeah, the last thing I need is to get locked out, I replied with a laugh.
No, it's...
He's got this, James said, laying his hand on Sarah's shoulder. We all had to handle the first one solo. You got this, right?
Hell yeah,
I said, still chuckling a little.
Just be safe, yeah?
Sarah said, giving me a concerned smile before she and James walked out. I rolled my eyes at the overly dramatic performance my colleagues were putting on, but I did give an absent-minded jiggle to the keys dangling from my belt loop to ensure they were in place. With the place all to myself, I kicked back, switched on the TV in the lounge, and kicked back on the couch. Maybe an hour or so after the previous shift had headed out, the bottom fell out. It sounded like a veritable monsoon was hammering against the walls of the cozy cabin we called a ranger station. Even with the brutal wind sounding as though it was thrusting the trees themselves against the exterior walls, it didn't concern me much until the TV lost its signal. I don't mean to sound like I was just trying to ride the system and whittle the hours away watching TV, but I suppose that had been my plan up until that point. I gave a heavy sigh, staring at the static on the screen until I just turned the damn thing off. I got to my feet, unclipped the keys from my belt to fidget with them, spin them around my finger and the like, pulled out my phone, and just aimlessly wandered around the cabin. As I casually played my bubble popper game while tinkering with my keys like a fidget spinner, I sighed once more when the lights went out. I could feel the absence of air conditioning almost immediately. The room got stuffy in a hurry, making me realize I was in for a long night indeed. While the storm continued to rage on, rattling the building so violently I almost jumped with every lightning strike, a new sound joined the soundtrack of my first night alone in the cabin. The scream sounded as though it was right outside, inspiring me to stash my phone and head to the gun cabinet. Whether it was from the scream itself, the fact I was alone, or just a bit of inherent fear at the time, my hand was shaking pretty aggressively while I unlocked the door to the gun safe. I grabbed a shotgun, a handful of shells, and a flashlight from the rack beside the safe, still trembling while I clicked it on. I exhaled a shaky breath as I softly walked to the window, planning to see if I could make out where the scream had come from before marching out into the storm. As I moved to pull open the blinds, the warnings of the chief leaped to the forefront of my mind, reminding me that this very act could be the deciding factor in my future with the Rangers. For a moment I hesitated, still holding the string to the blinds between my fingers. I just stared around the room, almost searching for something to guide me one way or the other. But when the horrified shriek echoed for a second time, my mind was made up, be it for better or worse. For several minutes I gazed through the glass, unable to make out much of anything. When the power went out, it had also snuffed out the street lamps, which left me just glaring into the darkness and the rain beating against the glass. It wasn't until the world outside was illuminated by a succession of lightning strikes that I finally got my first glimpse of what I assumed to be them, though that's not saying much. That first flash allowed me to see little more than the rain itself, looking like a veritable hurricane with how heavy and violently it beat across the ground in the cabin. The second strike revealed something my eyes couldn't quite register at first, but it was enough for me to focus on that spot for the next one. When the third lit up the world below, I felt my mouth droop and my eyes widen. When I saw the shape almost silhouetted by the rain. The longer I looked through the glass, the more clearly I could see them, though it was only the one at first. It didn't look like anything, only the shape of a large man, accentuated by the water splashing against its body. After a few minutes, I could see more of them, almost too many to count, just surrounding the building. They didn't move, but be it the inherent dread I was feeling, or my denial faltering, I swear I could feel them looking back at me. When the shrill scream blended into a frenzied cry for help, I had no more time for staring contests. Whatever those things were, I had to believe they had no ill intent besides just glaring back at me. The yelling now sounded as though it was farther back into the trees, so I was certain they were not exactly running from these invisible things that just stood in place. I ran out into the stormy night, wielding my flashlight in one hand and my shotgun in the other. I had shoved the extra ammunition into the pocket of my raincoat, but I hoped to God I wouldn't have to use them. My heart was racing harder than my feet as I weaved in between the still unmoving, rain-soaked silhouettes while I half expected them to reach out for me. And to my relief, I was clear of them and cutting through the trees before I knew it. The further I sprinted through the woods, the louder the screaming grew, assuring me I was nearing whatever frightened individual had found their way this far up the otherwise sealed-off mountain. My legs almost sent me to the soggy forest floor, skidding to a halt when I finally looked upon the one who continued to shriek. I felt my limbs shudder more violently than the slender branches shaking from the aggressive wind when my eyes met those of the screaming figure. "Help me," it said in a voice not unlike a terrified child. I couldn't form anything legible from my mouth, which trembled just as much as my fingers and toes.
Save me, mister, it said, getting to its feet.
The more it spoke, the more its voice transformed from that childlike tone to something far more deeper and hauntingly unnatural.
You will help me, won't you?
It stood 7 feet tall to my reckoning, though I can't say I was in control of my faculties enough to make an accurate assessment of such things. It looked like a skeleton, with pale flesh and slender musculature lining its bones. Its face was long, with its pointed chin almost touching the top of its chest, even with the neck that appeared just as lengthy as its scrawny forearms. When my flashlight slipped from my fingers, I could only make out its features in between flashes of lightning, each one revealing it had neared since the last. It looked as though its arms and legs had 2 joints for every one I had, making its staggering movements in the sporadic light even more unsettling to look upon. As it opened its mouth wider to reveal thin and pointed teeth, it appeared as though its jaw did not hinge, but simply dropped open as though it had pistons behind its wafer-thin cheeks. The emaciated and sunken chest heaved as it moved closer, accenting its ribs that seemed to double my own in number. Those insanely lengthy legs darted right at me, until I could finally make out the pure and almost shimmering white of its eyes. There were no irises to speak of, only tiny, round, blackened dots in the dead center of the otherwise milky pool of its gaze. "Do something!" a voice in the back of my head yelled out, but I couldn't convince my paralyzed limbs to move. It wasn't until the thing shrieked out again in that shrill squeal that almost caused my bladder to rupture from within that I finally forced my body to listen to me. It reached out towards me with those slender arms shifting at its inhuman angles, while I moved my limb, training my loaded shotgun before me. I pulled the trigger, releasing the shotgun spray directly into the midsection of the horrendous creature. Since I had only managed to take possession of the hand that held my weapon, my inability to stabilize the damn thing before I fired kicked the gun right out of the fingers that barely gripped onto it. As soon as the shell discharged, I felt it jerk my wrist and elbow to the side, sending my only weapon to the ground. Though the skeletal creature shrieked more aggressively when the shrapnel tore into its gut, it was only momentarily stunned. My weakened knees dropped me just as hazily to the soggy forest floor as the low-flying shotgun had only moments before, while I watched the torn flesh and tissue repair itself before my eyes. "My God!" the voice in the back of my mind whimpered. "What can I do?" The thing let out another squeal, but it was not one of anguish or pain. If I had to wager a guess, I would assume it was laughing. Its arms flailed wildly as it gyrated with its nauseating howl, which only sealed the reality of my fate in the recesses of my mind. I would not survive this. When it settled back down from its fit of maddening laughter, it just stared at me. It had me whipped and I knew it. Hell, I knew it too. But I just couldn't fathom how to do a damn thing about it at this point. When I gazed up at it, attempting to accept the inevitability of my mom and sister being able to cash in my life insurance policy, another bright stab of lightning revealed something I hadn't noticed before. Its pale flesh had scars across it, not remnants of tears and gashes or even shotgun spray to the gut, but symbols burned into it. Not just any symbol, but the one that adorned the outside wall of the ranger station, though these were about the size of a keychain. I reached for my belt, my heart racing with the prospect of a possible manner of escape. A desperate plea of preserving my worthless life that crumbled in an instant when I realized my keys now lay upon the shelf next to the gun cabinet back at the cabin. "No," I whimpered, my heart sinking into the pit of my stomach. I exhaled one last trembling breath as the thing leaned over at its lengthy waist, reaching out for me with both of its hauntingly unnatural arms, steadily twisting as they neared. I could smell the sickeningly foul stench, drifting from the blackened tips of its fingers as they closed the gap between us before I closed my eyes, bracing for whatever it had planned. When the gunshot rang out, I almost confused it for a violent clap of thunder at first. As the sticky fluids and grizzled tissue sprayed across me, my eyes blinked back open to see the thing glaring at the meaty stump of its left hand before another bullet tore into its chest.
"You okay, kid?"
Slade said, panting for breath while James and Sarah beat the creature away from me with the butts of their guns. I still couldn't quite produce words. Only looked on as the creature regrew its hand while each wound inflicted by my colleague sealed shut before the next. Once they had it down on its knees, they pulled something from their pockets, pressing it against the flesh of the beast. The thing shrieked out in agony from the circular crests, burning its skin, leaving that same symbol that hung from my keychain in their wake. While the injuries inflicted by our weapons faded within moments, those charred into it from the bizarre symbol remained reddened and angry. Slade helped me back to my feet before the thing pushed away from my associates, attempting to get to its feet and sprint back into the woods. When James kicked the legs out from under it, Sarah drew a lengthy machete from her hip. They moved so quickly, coordinating each attack so flawlessly that I could barely keep track. James finally pinned the thing to the ground, pushing the heel of its boot away from the withered chest of the flailing creature. With one swipe of her blade, Sarah separated that horrendously long head from the slender neck, kicking it to the side like a soccer ball when the work was done. I still just looked on while they severed each limb, before gathering up the dismembered parts in thick garbage bags once it was split apart into easily manageable servings. Only moments prior, I was certain I would not live to see another day, so I didn't speak a word while they handed me a few of the bags before helping me back to the station. Nobody acknowledged the things only made visible by the pouring rain as we left the trees behind, nor did anyone speak up until we got back into the cabin. Slade walked down to an apparent basement I never knew about, after tossing the bags down the stairs while James and Sarah fished some towels from a closet. Moments later, after the rumblings of something below, the lights flickered back on. Sometime later, the chief came back up from the lower level, panting slightly as he rubbed his brow with the back of his forearm. I had no way to know what exactly he did to dispose of the pieces of the creature in the woods, but that was only one of so many questions I had bouncing around in my mind at the time.
Probably should have told you about the generator downstairs,
Slade said with a chuckle, giving Sarah a grateful nod for the towel she handed him. Probably should have told me a lot of things, I replied, almost coughing on the first words I'd spoken in what felt like hours. You wouldn't have believed them, Sarah said, vigorously scrubbing the towel across her thick and wavy hair. I know I wouldn't back then. James was just staring out the window while attempting to dry himself off, only looking back from time to time to give it a green nod or smile. Sarah went to the kitchen, coming back some moments later with a tray holding our 4 steaming cups. I hadn't even realized how frigid my flesh was until the hot coffee flowed down my throat. I could feel its warmth spread through me the instant it entered my mouth. Slade handed me some blankets before we all gathered up in the lounge, sitting around like huddled up kids at a sleepover.
They can see you now,
he said, gesturing with a tilt of his head towards the window in the lobby. The invisible guys? I asked, almost laughing at the absurdity of it all.
The Watchers, we call them, on account of that's all they do. They don't mess with us, and we don't mess with them. But when they're out, well, so are the others.
He cut his eyes between each of us while he spoke, though I still had no doubt the rest of the room's occupants had been through this speech before. Still, he didn't come off as our boss at the time. The way he talked felt more like a close relative or a dear friend telling a tale.
You see, son, this mountain is home to what could be called a weak spot, a flimsy doorway between this world and another. For some reason, things can't get through one way or another on any normal day. But when it storms, well, that's a different story. Can't say why, as I'm sure it's way above my understanding. But something about the rain opens that door up further. That's where we come in.
So, what are we, like? I don't know. The guardians of the storm or something? I asked, still fighting back a chuckle at how silly the concept sounded. Hell yeah, James said with a smile, cutting his eyes at Sarah. I like that. We should put that shit on a t-shirt. We all laughed at his enthusiastic reaction to an otherwise insane conversation. If nothing else, that moment of levity allowed the tension in my back to release for the first time in God knows how long. Once the laughter settled down, the room fell silent. We all sort of stared into our cups or around the room, but I knew there was more to be discussed, given the nature of what our jobs entail. "We've all been through something like this," Sarah said, giving me a somehow compassionate smile. "But we were nearby the whole time."
Yeah, we wouldn't leave you alone on your first storm. It's just, I guess, part of it, you know?" James said, sounding equally as understanding as Sarah. "You gotta feel alone with it to appreciate what it is we're protecting people from out here." "I don't know, man," I replied, giving him a smirk. "I think I still would have been freaked out if I had a whole damn army with me." While we talked back and forth, another question occurred to me. "So if the door, I don't know, swings open when it rains, I mean, are those things still out there?"
Rest of the team is out there right now. We'll be until the storm calms.
"Should we be out there too?"
"Believe it or not, this isn't a bad one. Besides, everyone else is out by the gateway."
"Yeah, every now and then a stray gets by, but we keep the main group at the door, and the rest of us stay back to catch any that get through."
You'll get the feel for everything soon enough,
Slade said, giving me a more compassionate look than I thought him to be capable of.
One thing you need to prepare for, though. It's all hands on deck when it storms.
As the night progressed, they explained more about the doorway and how it's up to us to fight back against anything that comes through. I couldn't quite understand how something like this couldn't be left in the hands of some government-run military force, but Slade just said it's best if those in charge didn't know about the rips in the world like these. Yeah, I couldn't deny that it was scary to think of what the all-powerful people of the world could do with something like this. But could a handful of half-assed trained rangers do enough to keep this concealed? As it turned out, I was about the only one who was half-assed trained at the time, something that would be remedied very soon. Before the storm finally calmed down, Slade asked me once and for all if I was ready to be a full-time member of the team. I was scared. I can't lie about that fact. But how often does some average asshole get the chance to make a difference in the world? I told him I was in before the words even left his mouth. Something that inspired the rest of the room's occupants to act like it was my damn birthday or something. Slade looked downright proud as he clapped me on the shoulder while shaking my hand so enthusiastically that I thought it might just pop right off. He laughed pretty hard when I said that very thing. And it was only then that I realized I had never seen him smile before this night. When the morning crew arrived, they all took turns shaking my hand and truly welcoming me on board. After the chef gave them the news, they would likely take turns at sleeping off the busy night. But that was just another part of the routine I had to look forward to. When I finally got back home just a little while later, I passed out as soon as my head hit the pillow.
"A decision has been made, yes?" the stranger in the dark asked.
Once more, all I could see was that wide smile. But be it due to the veil being lifted from my eyes or just the simple fact that this was our second meeting, I was a bit more apprehensive about his presence this time. "It has," I replied with confidence in my words.
"Then you have found your place?"
"I believe I have, yes." Just as it had the last time we spoke, the rain began to trickle down around us. I looked to my hands to see the pools of crimson forming upon my palms before I glanced back up to that unwavering grin.
"A storm is still coming."
"I survived the last one."
"That was nothing. Just a taste of what is yet to come."
"And what is any of this to you? Who even are you?"
"You will see soon enough."
The laughter that erupted from that oversized mouth after those last words broke free from it damn near caused me to retch over the side of my bed when I, once more, found myself sitting straight up gasping for breath. I planned to ask Slade and some of the others if they've experienced any strange dreams featuring this unusual individual, but I'm sure it's nothing more than my subconscious, getting carried away with my new outlook on the world. I still have a lot to learn, and the guys pretty much guaranteed that my training is going to be far more removed from a simple walk in the park, but I think I'm prepared for it. I am most certainly intimidated by what else could be out there just waiting for us in the storm, but I hope I'm strong enough to handle it. Slade told me they'll have a local tattoo artist come to the station within the next few days to hook me up with the same ink they all share. The symbol that hangs from the keys I'll be damn sure never to be without again. I hope to find out what that symbol is, or at least what it represents. But that's only one of the many things I have yet to learn. Depending on how things go with my training, I'll try to post more soon. Just rest assured that next time the heavens open wide, cleansing the world below with its ferocious storm, we will be out there, lending a hand to keep the other side from breaking through. It may not be what I originally signed up for, but I think that for the first time in my life, I have truly found where I belong. Be it for better or for worse, well, that remains to be seen. One of my earliest memories are from a funeral. At the time, I didn't understand that it was a funeral. It's a confusing thought. I wasn't scared or sad. It was just a lot of people that I knew gathered in one room. A lot of them were upset, that much I remember. But there was something else. There was a man in the room resting on a big table. There was an older woman in a robe talking to us in a soft tone. At some point, my mother picked me up and we walked to the man on the table. He was being wrapped in plastic. I cried and my mother rocked me in her arms. I didn't understand that the man was dead. But how could I? I'd never seen anything die. A couple of the older kids were given blow dryers to help shrink the plastic. My mother put me down while she helped turn the body to get the wrapping right. I retreated to the end of the table where I played with my favorite Ninja Turtle toy. When no one was looking, I pricked a hole in the plastic, just between the man's toes. It was an accident. I was playing and the toy had a sharp edge. I was a bit embarrassed, so I didn't say anything. We all sat there for hours, singing songs and talking in hushed voices. The old woman in the robe was so kind and careful. I remember her stroking my hair and kissing me on the cheek. All the children of the town were there, both the infants and the teenagers. They didn't want us to sleep, but we couldn't help it. They gave us candy to keep us motivated, but I still nodded off. I was barely awake when I heard the noise. I remember the plastic turning this thick, ink-like black. Then something slipped out right there in that hole I poked between his toes. Something moved. I remember drawing in a cold breath that made me choke. It was so cold that I could feel something crystallizing down my throat. My voice burned and my heart kept beating louder and louder. I didn't understand what was happening. The last thing I remember from that day was the kind old woman screaming at two men to hold me down as she hurried to me with a bone saw and an apologetic expression. Next thing I remember, I was in the hospital. It wasn't that bad. Getting fed through a tube in your arm is weird, but I got so many toys and comics from that day that it felt like Christmas all over. I had aches and pains, but they passed. Once I was okay, my parents sent me to live with my aunt in a neighboring town. I didn't like it, but they painted it as this great opportunity and a chance to meet new friends. They said it was temporary, and I believed them. I hadn't met enough liars to know the signs. That temporary solution lasted all through my childhood. My aunt is a wonderful woman, and how she managed to care for not only me but my two cousins is beyond me. My parents would send her money, but they would never come to visit. We never talked about them.
And when they passed in the winter of 2016, I wasn't told until long after their funeral. I can't say I miss them. I wish I could, but I can't. After high school, I decided to pursue a degree in anthropology. I don't want to attribute all my interest to that first memory, but I can't say it didn't have an impact on me. I had no idea why our burial ritual had been so strange compared to anything I've read. We bury our dead in coffins, in the ground, or cremate them. We don't shrink wrap them in front of an audience. For the longest time, I thought it was something I made up. A bad dream brought on by a nasty fever. But the more I thought about it, the more I had to know for sure. While studying for my master's degree, I decided I was going to write a paper about this custom. That is, if it was real to begin with. I had a couple other topics lined up just in case. I asked my aunt about it, and she wasn't too happy talking about the topic, as it brought up bad memories of my parents. She asked me to consider other ideas. However, I took note of something interesting. She never disputed the fact that the shrink wrapping was real. She would mention how that town wasn't a big deal and how it wasn't noteworthy, but she never said I was wrong. That village is in rural South Dakota. If you follow the Run-Along River, past the town of Hilltop and the wheat farms, and far enough to the northwest, there is a hillside community with about 550 people. Not a lot of folks choose to settle there, as the place has spotty wireless and the roads have barely been maintained since the 70s. You'd be excused for not knowing it existed. Most people just notice their Wi-Fi going bad as they drive past it. Those who live up there are mostly retirees, but there's a couple who make their living doing seasonal jobs for the surrounding farms and ranchers. There's a grocery shop, a couple of truck drivers, and a church. If you follow the main road, you get to a bus stop. There's a preschool, but not a lot of children. Despite my aunt's disinterest, I decided to pursue this topic. I called up the village priest. The one I remembered was already an old woman, so I figured there'd be someone else attending the flock. Turns out I was right. I got in touch with a man named Pastor Oswald. He picked up before the second dial tone. I was sitting in my car at the time, holding my phone with my cheek as I scribbled in my notebook. "Pastor Oswald?" I asked. "I hope I got the right number." "Sorry, I don't get a lot of calls. Who am I speaking to?" I introduced myself as a master's student in anthropology and explained my interest in their burial rites. I didn't bring up the details of my past, thinking this person probably didn't know about me either way. I explained how I was there to interview and observe, for academic purposes. Pastor Oswald waved it off. "No problem at all. We have a ceremony scheduled 2 days from now that you're welcome to attend. Respectfully, of course." How could I say no? I drove out there on the day of the ceremony. I was told it would be held later in the evening, so I had plenty of time to make myself reacquainted with the town. I took a detour off the highway and noticed my internet connection going spotty, so I knew it wasn't far. There was something familiar about the smell. It's strange how well something that small sticks with us. Just from taking a deep breath, I could tell I'd been there before. Springtime never really changes. It was just that time of year when it's still uncomfortably cold, but the sun shines so brightly it stings your eyes. Where a warm jacket is too much but leaving at home is too little. That in-between space where nature stays by the door like a cat, meowing at you to open but not knowing if it wants to leave. I found the bus stop and subsequently the road leading into town. I don't think I've ever seen a more beaten-up patch of asphalt. There had to be some other way for trucks to get up there that I don't know about. I could hear my insurance premiums cry as the shock absorbers struggled to keep pace. The town church was a classic white with a small turn-of-the-century Midwestern bell tower. I couldn't see the bell, though. There were a couple of cars parked outside, but no one seemed to be around. I knocked a couple of times on the big double doors, but no one answered. I figured I'd give Pastor Oswald a call, but I couldn't get a signal through. It was the middle of the day, but there were a couple of people milling about. Mostly older folks walking their dogs or buying groceries. Out of all the people that passed by, 3 of them were under the age of 60, and they might have just appeared younger than they really were. The grocery store had a bit of a cafe corner where you could sit down to have a sandwich. It wasn't so much a coffee place as it was a collection of chairs scattered around a handful of wobbly tables, with a couple of handwritten signs showing the price of drinks. It looked way too cheap, but that's probably because they hadn't adjusted for the past 6 years of inflation. I grabbed a seat by the window, looking out over an abandoned street. A couple of crows had made their way into a trash can and threw garbage out there like there was no tomorrow. They looked like they knew what they were doing. More young birds than there were young people. As I sat down for lunch, a peculiar man walked in. He was in his early 50s, with a shaved head and a 5 o'clock shade lining his jaw. A bit of a beer belly, but he had these really clear green eyes. He gave me a long look, stopped, and circled back. He pointed a finger at me and cocked his head.
I know you. How do I know you?
I don't think you know me. Sorry.
Now hold on.
He sat down across from me, still thinking out loud. Then, pointing again, he started listing names. My mother, my father, my aunt, a couple of my cousins. Then something clicked. He snapped his fingers.
Don't tell me. You're Henry's kid.
Got me there, I admitted. You see the family resemblance?
Don't you?
I raised an eyebrow at that. He looked at me like I was an idiot. Jerry, Uncle Jerry. Dad's brother?
I never heard of an Uncle Jerry.
Figures. He reached out a hand. I was hesitant at first, but he had a genuine smile. That, and he had managed to list a whole bunch of names from my family, some of which I barely remember myself. He was the real deal in one way or another. I shook his hand as he started firing off a bunch of questions. We had a lot of catching up to do. We spoke for hours. He was pleasant to talk to, and the more I looked, the more of myself I could see in him. We had the same ears, for example, and the space between our front teeth. I told him about my studies and the peculiar memory of the shrink wrapping. He perked up at that.
They still do that. It's the strangest thing.
You know what it's about?
Yeah, I'm surprised you don't, given the circumstance, you know.
What are you talking about? I sipped my coffee as he gave me a curious look. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his seat.
They call it Good Friday, Lung. You had it as a kid. Don't you remember?
Good Friday, Lung, was a condition brought on by something in the soil. They didn't have an explanation for it, but it was something that occurred about 3 to 5 days of decomposition. A person who died would exude this black smoke that made people sick. Apparently that's something I got when I was younger. That would explain my memory.
Burying them just makes it spread through the soil, get sucked up into the groundwater and the crops. Dangerous stuff.
What about cremation?
Burning spreads them faster. It gets in the air like a cloud. A whole bunch of people died from that at the turn of the century, according to the church records.
What about acid? Liquidation?
Might work, but that'd be expensive as hell. You can't just get industrial-grade body-burning acids at a moment's notice. So yeah, we shrink wrap. Simple.
I got to see it for myself.
Well, you'll get to. Old Harlan passed a couple of days ago. Sad to see the stuttering old fool go, but that's life.
I'd never heard of Good Friday, Lung. It sounded ridiculous. Apparently it was some kind of aerial infection that affected people who'd lived in that town for too long. They'd tried several techniques over the years, but shrink wrapping was the simplest and most cost-effective way to prevent any harm from spreading. It didn't quite explain everything. For example, why did they gather all the children at the ceremony? It seemed ill-advised to bring all the young to witness something so macabre. What Jerry had shared was a start, but it didn't quite paint the full picture. I'd never heard of anything like this, and yet, they all accepted it like it was a part of everyday life. My estranged uncle was supportive of my research into the subject, albeit a bit less helpful than he might have wanted to be. For example, he had no idea where the condition originated. Apparently, it was just part of living by the river. Later that evening, people gathered at the church. Jerry was supposed to meet up with me a little later, so this was my chance to talk to Pastor Oswald and get a bit of history. The double doors were wide open, and a group of 24 people had already gathered. And there, on a stone altar at the very front, was an old, dead man, as naked as the day he was born. Pastor Oswald spotted me across the room. Compared to most people living there, he was relatively young, only 40 or so years old. He had these big glasses and an aw-shucks kind of demeanor to him. I could easily see him as someone willing to geek out at some kind of convention. He shook my hand and invited me in. "Glad to see a new face," he said. "These are trying times, but it's important to challenge perspectives." "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Just don't touch anything and you'll be fine." He showed me around the room and introduced me. There were 2 men by the back that were supposed to transport the body after the ceremony, locking it in a crypt. There were a couple of volunteers helping with the plastic wrapping and turning the body. Then there were the children. As part of the ceremony, about a dozen children were there to help out. Most of them were given blow dryers to help the plastic shrink wrap into this vacuum-tight seal. I had a couple of questions about that. "Is there a particular reason why you're involving the children?" "They're most susceptible to the condition. If someone gets sick, we need to know right away. That's why it's best to keep everyone around until we know the seal will hold. Involving them in the ceremony keeps them close and occupied." "Then why not keep them in the back or the other room?" "Then we can't immediately see if they get infected. They also get impatient from the waiting. Then why are there no paramedics around? Or doctors, maybe gas masks, or..." "It ain't that kind of condition." While Pastor Oswald still smiled, I could tell there was something in my line of questioning that poked a nerve. I slowed down, brought out my notebook, and took it one question at a time. "Then what kind of condition is it?" Pastor Oswald mulled the question over as he double-checked his equipment. There was a veil that was supposed to go over the body once the ceremony was complete. There was a wheeled gurney to roll the body out to be sealed in a communal crypt. Those things I expected. What bothered me was the table with instruments and songs. Flutes and tambourines, child-sized. "We've had a lot of people trying to fix it over the years. They can't find a source. They can't even tell if you have it or not. It's not until the moment you lay dead and the decay sets in that the condition reveals itself." "And by then you want them contained?" "Exactly. But as far as prevention goes, or the source of the contamination, your guess is as good as mine. I just know that it's been here a long time and will probably be here long after you and I are gone." "Then why not just move?" "Well, if you have it, you'll just be bringing it somewhere else. A lot of folks don't want to take that chance, so they decided to stick around. But as you might have noticed, there's a lot less people living here than there used to be. So in a generation or two, who knows?" He handed me a small bowl full of wrapped chocolate mints. I took one and smiled as he hurried off to help an older man with a walker. The ceremony started at about 9 p.m. Most people sat down in the pews, but the children were sat up front by the altar. Pastor Oswald spoke in a very calm and reassuring tone. He explained it as a blessing, a challenge of faith to be overcome. "In these trying modern times, We often forget about the imperceptible things that shape our lives. Things like the way the wind carries our breath, how the moon shines through our window when the power goes out, how faith lifts us out of bed to carry our burdens. But men like Harland know these things. They know them well. It was a beautiful speech. I remember to take notes, but I was a bit distracted. I didn't even notice Uncle Jerry sneaking in to sit at my side. I was about to say something to him when he raised a finger to his lips, showing me I ought to stay quiet. Pastor Oswald painted this ceremony as a reassurance of faith, that we are willing to do what we must in order to retain the natural order of things, that we must not let Harland be remembered as something harmful to the community. The ceremony was explained as tying a final ribbon on a life well lived. There were a lot of songs and hymns, some which I'd heard before, some not. Jerry seemed to know all of them by heart. Some kids helped out by playing simple instruments or tapping their feet. There was an older woman playing the church organ. Pastor Oswald had a surprisingly strong voice. Harlan's widow described her husband's love for the outdoors and how he loved to take moonlit walks by the wheat fields. She urged everyone to take the scenic route home that night, as it was a full moon, to maybe get a sense of what he appreciated so much about the open sky. It was a nice thought, and I could see more than a few tears among the audience. Her jab about his chain smoking got a couple of laughs too. As the ceremony neared midnight, the children were asked to come up to the plastic-wrapped body with their blow dryers. As the machines began to whir, I could hear the plastic creak as the wrap tightened. It didn't take long. All of a sudden, the man on the altar had gone from a person to a package, anonymous and generic. As the songs continued, I noticed a shift in the room. The plastic was slowly turning gray, and the two men who were charged with moving the body were on high alert. But not towards the body. They were looking at the congregation, the children in particular. The parents were too. It's like no one was really watching the dead body in the room. Something was changing. As the plastic turned completely black, everyone seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The plastic seal seemed to hold. Pastor Oswald cheered, and the congregation cheered with him as they celebrated and gave thanks. The body was carefully moved to the wheeled gurney and covered in a thin veil. The two men wheeled the body out, and I got up to follow him. Pastor Oswald stopped me with a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, but you can't come with him. It's a safety measure." "Not even from a distance?" He rolled his eyes a little and looked around the room. One of the kids was pulling on his sleeve, demanding his attention. All right. From a distance. Just don't touch anything, you understand?" "I'll keep my distance." He mouthed a silent thank you as he diverted his attention to a young boy wanting to show off his tambourine skills. Most of the children were being taken home. The ritual was over. I followed the two men outside. There were no graves, only mausoleums. The men stopped as they realized I was following, but I assured them I'd keep my distance. They nodded at that and continued rolling the body down a path. The wheels on the gurney struggled against the gravel. They were in the middle of a casual conversation, not really related to anything. Perhaps this was a bit of a routine for them. Given the average age of those who live there, that wouldn't surprise me. They were discussing one of them buying a new car from a less than reputable dealer and the pros and cons of such an investment. Halfway down the mausoleums, they stopped. Turns out they'd messed up the number and taken a wrong turn. They had to backtrack and go around. It was a bit of a hassle, so before they did, they decided to go on a smoke break. As promised, I kept my distance as I left the body on the table. There was no wind, and the gurney was steady, so there was no harm in it. I joined them in their discussion, trying not to impose. I asked a couple of practical questions about the ceremony and the history of their role. I made a couple of comments about how they were called ferrymen before they returned to their topic of second-hand cars. As they did, my ears perked up. I was hearing something, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I looked around for Jerry, but he was still inside with the others. It was something else. Not a breeze rustling the leaves, not a single drop of rain. No smell coming from the dry old blue sunflowers resting by the mausoleum door. No, it was something much more mundane. A crow. The ferryman hadn't noticed it. It had landed on the edge of the gurney, thinking the plastic wrap held some kind of trash-like delicacy. These birds were hard-coded to tear through wrapping to find the goodies inside, and it didn't take long to act on those impulses. By the time the ferryman noticed, it was too late. The crow poked its beak straight through the plastic as a black gas seeped out. It's hard to explain exactly what it looked like. It was a gas, but it moved like a liquid. But that's just the thing. It moved. Not just poured out, it moved with purpose. It swayed from side to side before dissolving into the ground. The ferryman freaked out as a confused crow took flight. Ah, damn it! Ah, fucking damn it! He got out! One of them sprinted for the church. The other hurried to the gurney and brought out 3 sets of straps from underneath. He positioned them over the legs, chest, and head of the body in a trained routine. And seconds later, the body moved. It wasn't a conscious movement as much as a spasm. Some dying mechanism triggering at full power, causing the whole body to flex. If he hadn't tightened the straps, more of the plastic would have ripped. There was still some black inside. Using duct tape, he secured the hole the crow had poked. "Get inside! Get inside now!" he screamed. It was full panic inside the church. The children who hadn't left yet were being held to the floor by their parents. The other ferryman was sprinting to his car to get the others. Pastor Oswald held a walkie-talkie in his left hand and a bone saw in his right. I walked up to him, watching his demeanor change from calm and collected to borderline frantic. "What's the bone saw for?" He looked up at me but didn't answer. He kept his eyes trained on the children. "What is the bone saw for?" I repeated. He swallowed hard, regaining his composure.
"Safety measures."
Pastor Oswald got regular updates through his walkie-talkie. They were going house by house, checking all the children in town. What exactly they were checking for wasn't apparent. They were doing a sort of head count, listing off the family names of those to be cleared, the kids who were held down being let up as suspicions faded. Things seemed to be okay, for now.
"Check the wheat fields. Harland liked the wheat fields," Pastor Oswald demanded.
I noted it in my book and looked for Uncle Jerry. He was off in the corner, staying well out of everyone's way. I hurried up to him. I barely got the question out of my mouth before he answered it.
"It's not just a lung disease," he whispered. "It's unnatural, defiant."
I don't understand.
"Some things don't work as they're supposed to. When explanation fails to account for impossible things, sometimes we just have to make do with what works."
Then explain it. Explain what you think happens. He looked at me, then back at the congregation. The tension was starting to subside.
"Old Harlan didn't want to go yet, so he clawed his way back for one more go. He just needs to find someone willing to carry on for him."
Like a possession? Jerry looked around the room and gave me the tiniest nod. As the congregation's tolerance to outsiders waned, Pastor Oswald hurriedly asked me to leave. He wasn't harsh about it, but rather matter-of-factly. This was a time of crisis in his community, and he couldn't take the time to be a good host. He insisted I come back in a couple of days when things calmed down, and he'd be happy to explain exactly what happened. But for now, I had to leave. I got in my car, waved goodbye to Uncle Jerry, and slowly made my way out of town. Not exactly the way I'd expected the day to go, but I wasn't about to intrude. Not on a night like this. I carefully bumped my way down the shitty road leading out of town and took a left. My car kept complaining about the Wi-Fi connection. I followed the road curling back and forth. There were no streetlights, but the moon was as large as ever. That, and I wasn't really expecting to see a lot of people on these roads. That is, until I noticed something up ahead. There was a car in the middle of the road. The motor was still running. I could see the exhaust. The driver's side door was wide open and covered in blood. I stayed in my car trying to get a signal on my phone. It didn't work. I shuffled my way out the door. I had to check if someone was injured. I mean, it sure looked like someone was, but there was no damage to the car. They hadn't hit anything. There was just a lot of open doors and blood, especially in the driver's seat. I called out to see if there was anyone there, but no one responded. The keys were still in the ignition. There was a comic book in the back seat. It was torn in half. I turned back towards my car and stopped. There was someone standing next to it, looking in through the window. The silhouette was barely covered by the moonlight, showing a figure with one arm much bigger than the other. A tilted torso shaped like a lowercase b. I could see the gleam of white in their eyes, but there was too much of it. Too many. It turned to me, still holding something in its left hand. It left a bloody handprint on my car. It tried to speak, but all that came out was a painful, drawn-out wailing. It was fast, much faster than me for sure. The moment it started running, I was only about 6 steps ahead. I threw myself into the parked car and slammed the driver's side door shut. I crawled over to the passenger side as the door was torn straight off and thrown down the road. I crawled out the other side and shut the passenger door behind me, trapping whatever was coming for me in the car. At least for a couple of seconds. It didn't take long for it to break through. I couldn't just run down the road in a straight line. It would catch me. I had to try and lose it. There was a wheat field on the left side of the road, and I figured I could lose it in there. I ran straight into it, keeping my head down and slowing only to hide my sound. I could hear something behind me, something frustrated with a deep, wheezing breath, like a man slowly choking to death. I managed to find a spot in the middle of the field where I could duck down. It was right there by the edge, but in the shade of a tree. There was no way that thing would accidentally find me there. I listened to it shuffling about. It was nowhere near me, but I could tell there was something wrong with it. The proportions were wrong, the sounds were wrong. It tried to speak, but it turned into either screams or a strangely coherent stutter. It sounded like words, but I couldn't make them out. Then I looked up. A family of crows tilted their heads down at me. One of them hopped along a branch, inspected me and cawed. The others followed suit. I don't think they meant anything bad, but they drew attention to me. Soon, that thing was coming my way. I tried to get away, but even at a sprint, I was nowhere near as fast. I remember something knocking me to the ground and putting a foot on my back. At least I think it was a foot. It was big enough to be a car tire. Something wrapped around my ankle and twisted, pulled, and twisted again. I'm not going to try and explain the pain of several compound fractures to someone who has never broken a bone, but it's a terrifying violation. Your body is being willfully and forcefully disfigured in a way it never has. That thing was tearing off my leg at the knee. And it did. I've experienced pain and fear before, but the mortality of imminent death is something that's hard to explain. It's a category of its own. There's a searing pain in your nerves, an intense, scalding heat. And as that heat grows ever worse, the rest of your body grows cold. You start to focus on such pinprick, minute details. The exact shape of a leaf on the ground, the texture of a grain of sand. Your mouth turns dry as you realize you can't force your eyes into focus. I was lying there on my stomach, my head to the side, bleeding out. The big thing lumbered away as someone joined me at my side. A man sat down in the grass, leaning against a tree. The crows didn't seem to react to him like they did with me. It was Uncle Jerry.
They don't mean to do it. They're not even scared. It's just like clawing your way to the surface for air. It's what comes naturally.
I couldn't answer. I was trying to conserve my breath.
This happened to you too. Back when I went.
My eyes rolled, looking for him. I saw his shape, but it was diffuse, transparent.
They got most of me out before I caught hold. Cut the extra arms off and all, but part of me is still in there. Just a bit distant.
I could hear something shuffling around in the field. Whatever did this to me was still out there.
I'm not here to gloat. I've had time to calm down, to come to terms with things. Your life is yours, I accept that. Honestly, I'm just glad we had a chance to talk.
He leaned in close, stroking my hair. I remember back when I was small, crying in my mother's arms. He was the man on the table all those years ago.
If you let me in, I'll make this work. Just this once. What do you say?
I couldn't say anything, but I didn't have to. He knew my answer. I would do anything for a couple of more breaths. I felt my pulse slow. I could focus, not just on a single straw of grass, but the whole field. I could wet my tongue and wipe the sweat from my brow. I scooched a little, expecting a fountain of pain from my missing leg. But nothing came of it. Looking down, I was fine. I had a new leg. The skin and hair of it looked a little darker, but it was a leg. It just wasn't mine. It took some time to get used to. By the time I got off the ground, the thing was still running through the fields, tearing up swaths of wheat and wailing at the top of its lungs. It would stop at times to cough and wheeze, looking up at the moon. It seemed fascinated by it, like it really enjoyed the outdoors while simultaneously letting out a terrified scream. 2 wills, 1 body. I made my way back to the main road. There were more cars there. The ferrymen, along with a couple of volunteers. They were armed. The headlights from their cars cast these long shadows stretching down the road, highlighting the blood, some of which was mine, dripping from the torn edge of my pant legs. "It's in the fields. It's big," I said, pointing. "Just the one?" "Just one." They fanned out and readied their weapons. The last thing I heard before they entered the wheat field was a silent, "Sorry, Harlan." And seconds later, they were shooting. I sat down in my car, adjusting the seat to the new length of my leg. I heard the shooting. Then the shooting stopped. They burned something in the field and dragged the abandoned car off the road. A couple of days later, I talked to my aunt. She confirmed that I'd had an Uncle Jerry and that I went to his funeral as a kid. That was the time I caught Good Friday lung. Apparently, I was one of the first kids to survive it. She didn't want to get into specifics, but it had been violent. You have to do something terrible to stop it from expanding in a host. Researching it further, the best explanation of the condition is that a newly dead body sort of finds its way into a younger one, like a person desperate for air. Except 2 people can't inhabit the same space. It collides, creating something twisted and in between. It can be stopped if noticed immediately, but even then, chances are slim. I wrote a paper about it, but it was rejected. I had to go to one of my backup subjects. This was a couple of years ago, and I've tried to gain some legitimacy. I've had my leg tested, but they haven't found a reason why it looks so different, or is of a different length. Yes, at a glance, it looks like something just slap-grafted onto my knee, but that explanation has been denied several times. There's no scar tissue, no mending marks on the bone. Nothing. It's like it was supposed to be there. And of course, I wonder if this is going to happen to me someday. I was born there, but I haven't lived there. How can you know whether you're part of this chain or not? You won't know for sure until you're gone, and by then, you're not experiencing anything. Or maybe, in the case of Harlan, you are. Do I want to? What's the alternative? I have plenty of years left to consider this, and I don't think I'll ever have a clear answer. Just to be sure, I think I'll have a final request upon my passing. Make sure my body is properly shrink-wrapped.